As a blacksmith, Lee Se-hoon should have no business knowing how to fight. So when he flawlessly mimics the signature spear art of a master, his opponent is caught completely off guard. In his past life, Se-hoon was forced to learn the skills of his comrades just to keep up. They were secrets shared only after he earned their trust, techniques he has now inherited. He unleashes a fluid and fiery assault, immediately forcing the combat prodigy onto the defensive. But when his opponent tries to retreat, Se-hoon sees right through his plan. To win, he prepares a final move, a revised version of the Flamewheel Ember Spear. He combines the spear art with another secret technique, creating a devastating crisscrossing slash. His combined attack proves superior, cutting right through his opponent's ultimate skill. With his spears at the prodigy's neck, the blacksmith secures an impossible victory. But all the victories in the world couldn't stop what was coming. Because this story doesn't begin with a triumph, it begins at the end of everything. But even with his knowledge of the future, victory would still come at an insurmountable cost. Humanity won the war against the demon gods, but they were about to lose the world. The perishing sea, an unstoppable tide left by a defeated god, is swallowing the last remnants of civilization. Among the few survivors are the infamous Three Dogs, selfish mercenaries who only care for themselves. But Lee Se-hoon, the blacksmith who armed them, reminds them they'd be nothing without his creations. Despite their greed, their power was undeniable, and they were crucial in the final battle. Se-hoon is haunted by a single thought: what if they had joined the fight for humanity sooner? But there's no time for regret, as the hero's borrowed time finally runs out. In a matter of moments, Se-hoon becomes the last man on Earth. As a blacksmith, he can't bear to see his work wasted, giving the fallen mercenaries a grave of their own weapons. With the apocalyptic wage closing in, he prepares for one final, desperate act. Using his unique skill, Blacksmith of Bonds, he resolves to forge one last item. But this time, the raw material will be extracted from his own heart. The result is a colorless ore, completely empty, a reflection of his hollow victory. If the ore is empty, he'll fill it with the only thing he has left, his crushing regret. As he hammers, he hears the familiar sound of waves that always accompanied his greatest creations. He forges a simple, unremarkable dagger, a seemingly useless final masterpiece. Choosing his own end, he sinks into the perishing sea, finally understanding the sound that has haunted him. His mind floods with what could have been a lifetime of regret and failure crashing down on him at once. This overwhelming emotion becomes a catalyst, forging his very will into a new power. A final, impossible system message appears as his new weapon triggers Return to Origin. Suddenly, Se-hoon finds himself 31 years in the past, a young candidate once again. Staring at his younger reflection, the impossible truth sinks in. The dagger he forged sent him back in time. There is no time for doubt or questions, only for the work that must be done. This time, he won't just forge their weapons, he will forge their victory. Now back in the past, a determined Lee Se-hoon vows that in this life he will pass the Babel exam. Forging with newfound resolve, he knows that meeting the Three Dogs again is only the beginning of his journey. As he works at the forge, his unique presence catches the attention of a proctor. Professor Kim In-keel observes the candidate with keen interest, sensing something different about him. The rhythmic clang of the young man's hammer on steel echoes through the workshop. Professor Kim is astonished, noting that while the hammering looks slow, it remains perfectly rhythmic with a clear, pure resonance, and immediately recognizes this as the mark of a top-tier forging skill. The entire workshop seems to pause as the professor approaches the workstation. Se-hoon inspects his work, a perfectly crafted blade, as observers wonder at its level of perfection. The Babel instructor, Assistant Han, can't believe a mere candidate could produce such a masterpiece. Even Professor Kim acknowledges that an incredible candidate has applied for their program. But just as everyone believes he's guaranteed to pass, Se-hoon shatters the blade with his hammer. Both Professor Kim and Assistant Han are left speechless by the sudden destruction. Scoffing, Se-hoon admits he still has a long way to go and cannot show off such trash, and declares that as a blacksmith, submitting a subpar weapon is something he absolutely cannot tolerate. Assistant Han yells at him for destroying a weapon in front of the professor and not taking smithing seriously. Ignoring the outburst, Se-hoon calmly addresses the stunned Professor Kim, stating he'd like to remake the assignment. But just as Han starts to reprimand the audacious candidate, the professor cuts him off. Professor Kim simply orders a bewildered Assistant Han to bring Se-hoon the remaining materials. When the assistant hesitates, the professor coolly asks if the candidate broke any rules, intimidating him into complying. Terrified, Assistant Han quickly scurries off to bring the materials as ordered. Professor Kim then addresses the young man, calling his attention to the ticking clock. He reminds him that with only 40 minutes left in the exam, his choice is a risky one. When asked if breaking the blade was the right decision, Sehun remains silent for a moment. Then, he responds with unwavering conviction, stating that he simply cannot submit something like that. Intrigued by his resolve, Professor Kim simply tells him to do his best. Sehun, however, recognizes the difficulty of achieving perfect forging with his current, weaker body. Acknowledging his low mana, strength, and time, he decides on the best option for the situation. Suddenly, a strange noise emanates from his workstation, drawing the attention of other candidates. One of them panics, realizing Sehun is infusing mana into the ignition stones and warning that they will explode if they catch fire. Ignoring the warnings, he drops the mana-infused stones into the forge, urging them to hurry up and burn. The panicked candidate can't believe this crazy guy would do something so reckless. And then, a vibrant, multicolored explosion of fire erupts from Sehun's forge. The other candidate screams in terror, yelling for someone to bring a fire extinguisher. As Assistant Han begs the professor to stop him, Professor Kim calmly tells him to let it be. Instead, the professor instructs his panicking assistant to observe the flow of the flames closely. Sehun has unleashed the 5-color fire demon, a technique that uses the resonance of 5 ignition stones to create high-temperature flames. He knows it's an excellent technique that requires precise mana control but can be used even with minimal mana. The other candidates are shocked that the forge didn't explode, and they notice something else has changed. To their amazement, the color of the iron ingot itself has been altered by the unique flames. Professor Kim understands immediately. The young man resonated the stones to enhance firepower and modify the ingot's properties, and knows this will shorten his forging time, but with only 30 minutes left, his schedule is still tight. He muses that while the candidate's initial forging was excellent, skill alone might not be enough, and concludes that despite his talent, the young man simply won't make it in time. Sehun, however, works with a confident smirk, ready to prove him wrong. He quenches the blade in the multicolored flames, pushing forward with his creation. Once more, the sound of his hammer striking glowing metal fills the room. But the strain becomes too much, and the handle of his hammer shatters in his hand. Cursing his weak body, he laments running out of mana and protection, vowing to start training as soon as the exam is over. Yet despite his bleeding hands and exhaustion, he knows he can't waste a single second. Pushing through the pain, Sehun continues to hammer away at the blade. He pushes his body to its absolute limit, determined to finish his work. Just then, the proctor announces 10 minutes remaining, adding to the pressure. With only 3 minutes left, he works feverishly on the final sharpening. Down to the final minute, he continues polishing just as the proctor yells for everyone to stop. At the last possible second, he completes his 5-color fire blade and acquires the skill Artisan of Flame. The system judges the armament's rank, declaring the 5-color fire blade as a high grade. A status window details the newly forged weapon, a high-grade curved sword whose properties can change based on the wielder's mana. Another candidate blurts out in disbelief that the armament's grade is high. Sehun calmly asks the stunned proctors to check the weapon's detailed information window. Assistant Han erupts, shouting PPASS, before being quickly shushed by Professor Kim. Later, Sehun is called into Professor Kim In-Keel's office. Confidently, he asks the professor if the sword he submitted was worthy this time. Standing by the window, Professor Kim concedes that, for now, it was. But he notes that the young man still looks unsatisfied and decides to speak frankly. He then advises Sehun to withdraw his application, bluntly stating that Babel will not satisfy his high standards, and explains that while Babel's reputation is immense, the refining department has been producing no notable results. Sehun, however, is unfazed, as he already knows this from his past life. He recalls that Babel's refining department is destined to shut down in 8 years, while the Vulcan Academy rises to take its place. Cutting the professor off, he declares that he is wrong about the future. With unshakable confidence, he asserts that the best institution will not be Vulcan, but Babel, the very place he is now enrolling. The professor challenges him, asking if he's confident enough to become the department valedictorian, to which Sehun coolly replies that on the student level, no one will be better than him. Skeptical, Professor Kim quizzes him on the selection process for the freshman department valedictorian. Sehun perfectly recites the procedure, explaining that an additional exam is held between the top 2 students to determine the department's final candidate. At Babel Academy, cadets are broadly divided into 3 main departments. These 3 branches are the Combat Department, the Support Department, and the Technology Department. And within these departments are dozens of intertwined majors, creating a complex academic structure. To become a department valedictorian is therefore an immense honor within this system. The title signifies that one has received the most outstanding evaluation and is acknowledged as a top-tier talent by all of Babel. Hearing Sehun's bold ambition, Professor Kim falls silent and clenches his scarred fist in thought. Dropping his formal title, he decides to speak to the young man not as a professor but as a senior blacksmith, and advises Sehun to transfer to Vulcan Academy, warning that it's difficult to succeed as a blacksmith at Babel even for a valedictorian. The professor insists that the true path to success for a blacksmith of his caliber lies at Vulcan Academy. Sehun smirks, realizing the man is genuinely decent for caring more about a junior's future than his own department's recruitment. However, he confidently asserts that the environment doesn't matter to him. He then doubles down on his previous statement, proclaiming that Babel will soon become the best simply because he is enrolling. Professor Kim lets out a small chuckle, amused by the sheer arrogance of the claim that one student's presence could elevate an entire academy. But despite the outrageous confidence, the professor admits to himself that he doesn't hate it. Convinced by the young man's spirit, he extends a hand, saying he looks forward to working with him. As they shake hands, a system notification confirms that a level 1 bond has been established between Lee Sehun and Kim In-kyeol. Without a moment's hesitation, Sehun activates his unique skill to extract the newly formed bond. The extraction yields a piece of flame-bearing iron, a high-quality ore with the ability to store fire. Later that day, Sehun returns to his humble living quarters in a quiet part of the city. There, he sits on his bed, inspecting the glowing ore he created from his bond with the professor. He muses that while the quality isn't bad, the amount he could extract is disappointingly small. His unique skill, bond extraction, materializes non-existent ores by quantifying the strength of a relationship. So he correctly deduces that the ore's small size is due to the bond's low level, making it difficult to use for now. Checking his own status, he acknowledges that his stats are pitiful compared to other incoming Babel freshmen. He sighs, admitting his current state is regrettable, but a small price to pay for the chance to return to the past. Deciding now is the time for patience, not greed, he centers himself. With renewed determination, he reminds himself that there's still plenty of time to grow strong enough to crush the Pandemonium bastards. His mind flashes back to the Pandemonium, the monstrous force that threatens the entire planet. He recalls the true masterminds, the 6 great demon gods whose plan led to humanity's destruction. Knowing the stakes, his next priority is to obtain memory-related skills or items so he doesn't forget crucial future events. With his enrollment secured, he considers the first step of his plan complete and shifts his focus to what comes next. But as he contemplates his plan, a sudden flash of insight and a system notification interrupt his thoughts. The system announces that Sehun's bond with himself has finally reached level 1. This level up in turn unlocks a brand new skill, Bond Imprint. 1 week later, the day of the additional exam has arrived at Babel Academy. Sehun, looking sharp but feeling lost, wanders the unfamiliar halls in search of the exam room. He finally locates his destination, Refining Room 3. Upon entering, he's formally greeted as Cadet Lee Sehun, only to find the atmosphere is unexpectedly tense. He's surprised to see the room is already filled with what appear to be several high-ranking faculty members. A blonde man tapping a clipboard sarcastically comments on how relaxed Sehun seems for arriving so close to the start time. This is Michael Barmut, the Vice Dean of Borsippa, who sternly asks if he can't see that everyone else has been waiting. Professor Kim calmly steps in, reminding the Vice Dean that the exam doesn't start for another 10 minutes. Vice Dean Barmut dismisses the point, retorting that the issue is one of attitude, not punctuality. Watching the exchange, Sehun realizes Professor Kim is not only managing a struggling department, but is also at odds with the academy's higher-ups. It then dawns on him why the professor had recommended he attend a different academy altogether. His attention is then drawn to the other student in the room, his blonde rival for the valedictorian spot, who returns his gaze with disdain. The 2 top candidates size each other up from across the room. When our guy says, "Nice to meet you," the blonde student scoffs condescendingly, making his contempt clear. Sehun is left speechless by the student's unbelievable arrogance, just as a new, feminine voice cuts through the tension. Everyone in the room, including the cocky student and the stern Vice Dean, immediately turns towards the door. Vice Dean Barmut politely addresses the newcomer as Dean, noting that they were just wondering when she would arrive. Sehun's eyes widen in utter shock as he recognizes the person who has just entered. A woman with striking red hair and a commanding presence apologizes for being late. She is Ryu Unha, the dean of the Borsippa department and a formidable figure from Sehun's past life. Sehun's mind short-circuits as he tries to process the unexpected reunion, and he can only scream internally, wondering why on earth she of all people is here. Sehun nervously recalls hearing that Ryu Unha worked at Babel, but he is still shocked by her position. He never imagined, however, that she would be the dean of the entire department. In his past life, he knew her as the S-rank hero, Weapon Eater's Ryu Unha. Her unique skill allowed her to amplify her power by devouring armaments, making her a truly formidable figure. Before his regression, she had been a long-time regular customer at his blacksmith shop. His mind flashes to a tragic moment from the future, where he found her defeated and despairing. In that haunting memory, she used her last breath to express her regret for eating his armament. And the memory of standing over her body in the desolate, rain-soaked ruins remains a grim reminder of the future he must now change. Professor Kim's voice suddenly snaps Se-hoon out of his dark memories, pulling him back to the present exam. The professor announces that he will now explain the rules for the valedictorian exam. And he sets the stage, informing them they have a total of 90 minutes. Their task is to create an armament that can be paired with the sword they crafted in the preliminary exam. There's a catch, however. They are restricted to using only alchemy smithing for the entire process. Moving on to the materials, the professor gestures toward a wide assortment of ores. He informs them that they can freely choose from any of the provided materials. With the dean and vice dean watching as judges, he urges them to create something they can be proud of. With the rules now laid out, Professor Kim prepares to officially start the exam. Just then he declares, "Begin the exam," and the tense face-off between Se-hoon and Hans officially begins. Se-hoon ties his apron, mentally processing the alchemy smithing-only restriction. While he strategizes about how to control mana resonance, Hans impatiently taunts him for his slow start. Se-hoon glances over, wondering if he heard the arrogant comment correctly. When he asks if the taunt was for him, Hans smugly replies, "Is there anyone else around?" Professor Kim immediately steps in, calling out the smug student by name Hans Barmut. He sternly warns him to refrain from making any comments unrelated to the exam. As Hans curtly apologizes, the name Barmut finally clicks for Se-hoon, and he realizes his opponent is the vice dean's son. So he comically puts two and two together, realizing that's why the vice dean and Hans look so similar. Noticing Se-hoon's delayed reaction, Hans smirks, aware that his opponent has finally put the pieces together. The arrogant student relishes the moment, knowing his connection as the vice dean's son gives him a perceived advantage, and internally gloats, contrasting his own prestigious background and superior mana capacity with Se-hoon's commoner status. With complete confidence, Hans selects his materials, believing the outcome is already set. The judges watch as Hans chooses Lazurite and Hainam Jade, both high mana, water attribute materials. Professor Kim points out the inherent difficulty, noting that water attribute mana's sensitivity to fire makes smithing particularly challenging. However, Vice Dean Barmut dismisses the concern, claiming that modern alchemy smithing has overcome such issues. Professor Kim counters that, while versatile, the time required for alchemy smithing can vary greatly, which could be a problem under a strict time limit. The Vice Dean cuts him off, boasting that his son, Hans, can synthesize any ore within a mere 30 minutes. As Hans begins his work, Professor Kim is shocked, realizing that a 30-minute resonance synthesis is an incredible feat. He marvels that such a skill level puts Hans far beyond other entrants, and even most second-year students. And then it all clicks for the professor. The tight time limit, the specific materials, and the required method were all chosen to give Hans an overwhelming advantage. Enraged by the blatant favoritism, he internally curses Vice Dean Barmut, calling him an old snake. Meanwhile, Se-hoon calmly makes his own selection of materials, catching the attention of Dean Ryu Unha. He holds up a hydrate crystal and several crimson firestones. The judges are taken aback by his shocking choice of materials. The Vice Dean scoffs at his choice, calling them mere fire attribute versions of the ores his son chose and mocking his apparent pride. Hans, too, wonders if Se-hoon intentionally chose ores that directly contrast with his own water attribute materials. But he quickly dismisses the thought, convinced that a commoner with low mana could never control something as volatile as a crimson firestone. His confidence soars as he thinks this will be an even easier victory than he had imagined. But his triumphant thought is cut short by a sudden, intense burst of fire erupting from Se-hoon's station. Se-hoon has just activated a new skill, Bond Imprint. His Bond Imprint, Harmony skill, allows him to equip and use bond stones, a game-changing ability. He equips the Flame Bearing Iron, the very bond he extracted from Professor Kim, to his right arm. A torrent of fire erupts, enveloping his arm and stunning everyone present. Flustered and confused, Hans can only yell that it must be some kind of cheap trick. But it's far from a trick, as Se-hoon masterfully begins to manipulate the volatile ores with his newfound power. The two candidates continue to work at their stations. One is surrounded by a calm blue light, while the other is engulfed by a raging inferno. The Vice Dean scoffs at Sehun's method, calling it foolish and insisting that one must only use pure mana for resonance, and predicts that forcing resonance with elemental mana will inevitably cause the materials to go berserk. At this, he expects an imminent explosion from Sehun's station, but our guy ignores everything and just focuses. The judges, however, are so overwhelmed by the sheer firepower radiating from Sehun that they completely miss the drama unfolding on the other side of the room. Just then, the cores begin to dissipate to form a weapon, and in a flash, Sehun completes his work, crafting the fire-accumulating sheath with impossible speed. Vice Dean Barmut stares in utter disbelief, unable to process what he just witnessed. Against all odds and expectations, Sehun has successfully created his armament. A system window reveals his creation, a rare-grade fire-accumulating sheath, complete with the wildfire skill. Hans, who is still struggling with his own synthesis, is floored to see that his rival is already finished. He mutters in disbelief, insisting that such a rushed and forceful method should have resulted in a berserk explosion. As he stands there questioning his own understanding, the mana in his waterstones begins to crackle and spark violently. Realizing his son is making a critical error in his panic, the Vice Dean screams for him to stop. But it's too late. Hans is engulfed as his own mana stones overload with chaotic energy. A single, confused, "Huh?" escapes his lips as his creation begins to shatter. And in a brilliant flash of blue light, Hans Barmut's station erupts in a catastrophic explosion. The afternoon after the exam, the dust finally settles in the refining department exam hall. The floor is littered with the shattered remains of Hans Barmut's failed alchemy experiment. Professor Kim In-Keel reflects that normally, after an evaluation like this, one of the two candidates would have been recommended for valedictorian. But now, he can only lament what a pity it is that the contest had to end in a forfeit. His gaze reveals his sheer disappointment that the highly anticipated showdown concluded so anticlimactically. Nearby, a defeated and injured Hans Barmut clutches his arm, surrounded by the debris of his failed creation. His hand trembles uncontrollably as he grapples with the shame of having to forfeit the exam. Vice Dean Michael Barmut argues that since his son was injured, the fairest course of action is to void the exam and schedule a re-examination. However, Professor Kim firmly objects, stating that an official exam can't be overturned, especially since the incident was caused by Hans's own carelessness. The Vice Dean puts on a concerned facade, condescendingly suggesting the professor cares more for exam results than for an injured student. Striding forward, Michael points out that the fastest resonance speed ever recorded in academia is a full 5 minutes. He then questions the legitimacy of Sehun's performance, asking how a new student could possibly achieve simultaneous resonance in an instant. Sehun remains quiet, as the narration explains that alchemy smithing was developed for situations where traditional methods were impossible. Unlike traditional smithing, which is said to kill the ore, this method focuses on bringing the ore's life to the forefront. Hans had believed the essence of the technique was to find the mineral's core and unfold its life, a fundamental misunderstanding of the true principles. Sehun scoffs internally, knowing the advanced technique he used is destined to become the standard within a few years, making it hardly a secret. Feigning ignorance, he simply says he doesn't know what the Vice Dean is talking about, deciding not to waste his time explaining it to a stiff old fogey. Convinced he has the upper hand, the Vice Dean smirks, declaring that Sehun must have used a fraudulent method. He scoffs at the sheath, claiming that a freshman with no family background creating a rare-grade armament is so impossible that it's an obvious cheat. Sehun, however, is simply baffled, wondering what on earth the man is even talking about. In a stunning twist, Dean Ryu Unha interjects, agreeing with the Vice Dean that Sehun's achievement indeed makes no sense. Believing he has won her over, a smug Michael pushes to disqualify Sehun for fraud and proceed with a re-examination. But his triumphant expression falters into confusion as he registers the Dean's next move. Professor Kim is equally stunned as Dean Ryu Unha bypasses them and approaches Sehun's crafted sheath. She picks up the fire-accumulating sheath, her curiosity piqued while she examines its intricate details. While holding the armament, she agrees that it makes no sense, but her tone is one of fascination, not accusation. She then abruptly points at a bewildered Lee Sehun and calls his name. To the shock of everyone present, the renowned weapon eater asks for just one lick of his creation. Both the Vice Dean and Professor Kim are rendered utterly speechless by the Dean's bizarre and unprecedented request. The awkward silence is broken only by the audible growl of the Dean's stomach. Later that afternoon, Sehun walks through downtown, reflecting on the chaotic conclusion of his exam. He arrives at a rendezvous point, looking surprisingly casual despite the intense events of the day, and confirms to himself that, as expected, he was appointed valedictorian. However, he internally critiques his sheath, admitting that while its function is sound, the fine-tuning is still incomplete. Despite the imperfection, however, he doesn't seem too concerned. In fact, he lets out a sinister chuckle, finding immense satisfaction in the memory of Vice-Dean Barmut's enraged face, much to the alarm of nearby passers-by. He suddenly stops in his tracks, realizing the name Barmut rings a bell from his past life. He racks his brain, digging through his memories to place the familiar yet ominous name. A flashback reveals Louise Valent from his previous life, explaining how cheap armament she bought at Babel suddenly exploded on her. She curses the name of the blacksmith responsible for the mana burns that left her with lifelong injuries. In his past life, a younger, less powerful Sehun could only listen to his comrade's tragic tale. The pieces click into place. The blacksmith who left Louise with lifelong injuries was named Barmut, leading him to wonder if Hans is that very same person. Just then, he reconsiders his goal of rehabilitating the three dogs, realizing that for the explosive dog, Louise, he may not need to seek her out directly. A confident, calculating smile spreads across his face as a new plan begins to form. He now understands that if he can stop Hans Barmut from his evil deeds in this timeline, he can prevent Louise from ever going astray. Meanwhile, in the Borsippa department conference room, a heated debate rages over the dean's decision to appoint Sehun as valedictorian. A skeptical professor voices his disbelief, suggesting the dean's decision is outrageous. Sitting calmly at the head of the table, Dean Ryu Unha coolly asks if she hears any objections. The professor quickly backpedals, reframing his comment not as an objection, but as advice. Another professor then chimes in, condescendingly reminding the dean that it hasn't been long since she took office. The room murmurs in agreement, collectively suggesting that while Sehun's creation was impressive, the decision warrants a more thorough review. Professor Kim speaks up for Sehun, arguing that the other professors fail to grasp the perfect compatibility between the sheath and the five-color fire blade. Another professor admits the creation is surprising but remains skeptical about its true quality and completeness. The dean cuts through the debate, asserting her belief that the sheath is likely less than 60 of what Sehun intended, and that this very imperfection is what makes him so promising. She then looks over the doubtful faces in the room, preparing to issue her final ultimatum, and declares that if, even after seeing Sehun's demonstration, they still cannot accept her decision, she will step down from her position as dean, staking her entire career on Sehun's potential and shocking the room into silence. 54 years ago, the Tower of Heroes descended from the heavens, offering humanity a path to evolution. However, at the same time, the swamp of pandemonium erupted from the underground, a corrupting force that brought about a massive calamity, threatening this newfound potential. It was during this tumultuous time that Babel, the largest hero academy in the Pacific, was established, and it has produced countless heroes ever since. The Ascension Emperor, Ludwig Schubert, addresses the new students, promising that they too will become great heroes. He urges the new ascendants of Babel to go forth, concluding his speech by reminding them that becoming a hero is their solemn duty. Lee Sehun watches the speaker, identified as the Ascension Emperor, Ludwig Schubert. He muses that while Schubert seems like a nice person on the surface, from his past life, he knows the Emperor isn't as benevolent as he appears. An announcer then calls the department valedictorians to the stage for a demonstration, and Sehun and Hans Barmut begin to ascend from the crowd. Sehun scoffs at the idea of being a department valedictorian, recalling how many arrogant people from his past life had peaked during their time at the academy. As he takes the stage, he readies himself for the demonstration. Just then, the crowd cheers as the valedictorians take their positions, and the announcer declares the start of the demonstration. Watching the scene unfold, our protagonist smugly notes that he now understands why some people become so arrogant. The announcer enthusiastically introduces the opponent for the demonstration. It's revealed to be a marionette factory automaton Model 9, a golem with the combat power equivalent to a C-rank hero. Sehun correctly deduces that since the automaton is unarmed, it must use martial arts. Just as the announcer calls for the combat department's representative, the first demonstrator is introduced, the combat department's valedictorian, Jake Myers. The valedictorians stand in a large arena, ready for their individual demonstrations against the automaton. Sehun recalls that Jake is the third son of the Myers family, who were famous for their swordsmanship, making him an oddball for choosing to use martial arts instead. Meanwhile, Jake readies his fists, eager to begin the match. Just then, the announcer officially starts the match. The automaton immediately lunges at him to attack, but Jake deftly dodges its swift punch. With incredible agility, he evades a flurry of attacks from the powerful golem. After evading the assault, he plants his feet, ready to counterattack. With a confident smirk, he declares that it's his turn to strike. He then launches forward, preparing to land a devastating blow on the automaton. He lands a single explosive punch to the golem's torso. The force of the blow shatters the automaton's core, much to the astonishment of the onlookers. Sehun is shocked, remembering from his past life that Jake died as an A-rank hero in his mid-20s, and realizes that with this level of skill, Jake should have been considered a prodigy seen only once a decade at Babel. Our protagonist is deeply troubled, questioning why a fighter this talented only ended up as an A-rank in the past he remembers. On the stage, a triumphant Jake prepares to deliver the finishing blow. With a final, powerful punch, he shatters the remains of the defeated automaton. The automaton's head rolls across the arena floor, its red eye dimming. Jake casually wipes his brow, remarking that it's been a while since he got to loosen up like that. The announcer is left momentarily speechless by the display. He quickly recovers, however, praising Jake's magnificent demonstration and noting how he subdued a C-rank equivalent foe in a single breath. Jake waves to the roaring crowd, soaking in the applause for the Akarquief valedictorian. Sehun notes that this impressive performance has set a high bar, putting serious pressure on the next person up. The announcer then calls up the next participant, the valedictorian of the support department, Cadet Inoue Erika. Sehun, however, isn't worried about the pressure, as he recognizes valedictorian. He recalls her identity. She's Erika, the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of Japan's 3 great families. In his past life, she became a renowned S-rank hero who wielded a myth-grade armament. However, he also remembers her tragic fate. She was corrupted into a Majin and ultimately subjugated by her own family. Knowing she becomes a Majin in the future, he decides that getting close to her now won't do him any favors. Just as he thinks this, Erika glances over her shoulder directly at him, catching him off guard. Startled, he wonders why she just looked at him as she walks to the stage carrying a birdcage. Meanwhile, Erika's opponent is announced, an upgraded Model 9 automaton equipped with armor, boasting 1.5 times the defense of the previous one. The announcer builds anticipation, wondering aloud what kind of performance Cadet Inoue will show against this enhanced foe. Erika calmly presents the birdcage, which contains a single black crow. Her eye glows with power as she commands her familiar, "Go." The crow is unleashed from the cage and flies towards the waiting automaton. Sehun watches in confusion, wondering what she could possibly do with just a single crow. The armored automaton readies itself for the incoming attack. It takes a solid defensive stance, raising its arm shields. Our guy analyzes the situation, noting that it will be difficult for such a small creature to pierce the golem's specialized defense. But then the crow transforms mid-air, cloaked in dark energy as it becomes an armored, menacing familiar. It dives down with blinding speed, a torrent of dark energy trailing in its wake. The familiar strikes the automaton in a massive, swirling vortex of power. The automaton's chest armor cracks and shatters from the immense force of the single strike. And then the golem explodes violently, its core overloaded and destroyed instantly. The now flaming crow returns to Erika's side while she stands completely unfazed by the destruction. The announcer screams in amazement at the truly incredible display. Even the crowd erupts in cheers, stunned that she destroyed the defense-enhanced automaton with a single strike. As the crowd chants Erika's name, Sehun realizes the atmosphere has become so charged that simply showing off an armament won't be enough to impress anyone. Finally, the announcer calls for the last demonstrator, the valedictorian of the technology department, Borsipa Cadet Lee Sehun. Meanwhile, the first demonstration supervisor, Ludwig Schubert, sits silently, having already overseen the previous impressive displays. He comments that the level of the new valedictorians is quite high, yet worries the pressure might be too much for a student from the overlooked refining department. However, the second supervisor, Dean Ryu Unha, confidently asserts that there won't be any issues. The announcer then stokes the crowd's anticipation, questioning if Sehun can possibly surpass the shocking performances of Jake and Erika. In response, Lee Sehun calmly steps onto the stage, drawing the fire-accumulating sheath and the 5-color fire blade he crafted. A system window appears, displaying the details of his armaments, the advanced-grade 5-color fire blade and the rare-grade fire-accumulating sheath. Students in the audience are amazed, noting that it's highly unusual for a freshman from the refining department to craft a rare-grade item. Despite the achievement, some spectators find his work crude and lacking the flashy impact of the other departments, much to the satisfaction of Vice Dean Barmut. Believing this lackluster demonstration will cause Dean Ryu Unha to lose face, the smug Vice Dean anticipates that the position of Dean will soon be his. All the while, Dean Ryu Unha watches with an unreadable, intense expression, her reputation on the line. As the announcer prepares to bring out the standard D-rank equivalent automaton, Sehun suddenly interrupts him. He requests a much stronger opponent, model number 8, and demands that it be equipped with armor. The announcer is left completely baffled by the student's seemingly insane request. He nervously sweats, realizing the young man just asked to fight an automaton that can withstand B-rank hero attacks, now with extra armor. Flustered, the announcer protests that it's impossible to prepare on such short notice and accuses him of trying to ruin the demonstration. Just then, Professor Kim In-keel steps forward, revealing that he had already prepared for such a contingency. To everyone's shock, an armored Model 8 automaton is then brought into the arena, ready for battle. As the new, formidable opponent is put in place, the announcer wonders if the professor's over-the-top support might backfire horribly. Professor Kim stares down at his student, waiting to see how he will handle the immense challenge he set for himself. A confident smirk plays on the professor's lips, proud of his student's bold ambition. With a silent look of encouragement, he gives his student permission to go all out. Completely bewildered by this turn of events, the announcer gives up trying to understand and simply decides to start the match. As the match officially commences, the crowd roars with excitement for the unexpected showdown. Nearby, Professor Kim and Dean Ryu Unha watch intently, their expressions a mix of anticipation and scrutiny. Sehun hears his professor's encouragement in his mind and smirks, ready to put on a show. Resolving to live up to the expectations placed upon him, he takes his stance, and he begins to channel the volatile multicolored flames from his blade, a risky move that could injure a user with low mana. From the stands, Jake Myers cheers enthusiastically at the flashy display, exclaiming that it's insane, while Inoue Erika watches with quiet intensity. Meanwhile, his rival Hans Barmut scoffs, dismissing the spectacle as all flash and no substance. He remains convinced that Sehun, who lacks significant mana, can't possibly control the clashing flames within the blade without getting hurt. However, our protagonist reveals his true plan, using the fire-accumulating sheath to store the blade's dangerous, explosive flames internally. He then activates his Artisan of Flame skill, injecting and compressing pure crimson flames into the sheath. With his eyes glowing like embers, he finishes channeling the immense power and announces that the storage is complete. The Model 8 automaton raises its defenses, sensing the incredible energy being gathered against it. Sehun prepares to unleash the armament skill of the fire-accumulating sheath, Wildfire. He then swings his blade, releasing all of the compressed mana in a single, overwhelming strike. The other valedictorians watch in shock as the Wildfire skill detonates the compressed mana with explosive force. The forcibly compressed 5-color fire demons within the sheath are unleashed in a cataclysmic blast. Dean Barmut and another professor are left speechless by the sheer power of the attack. The announcer can only stare in disbelief, wondering what on earth this crazy kid is doing. As the dust and smoke begin to clear, Sehun stands alone in the now decimated arena. Sheathing his blade, he exhales and wonders to himself if perhaps he overdid it. The result of his attack is revealed. A massive, deep trench carved straight through the solid floor of the central auditorium. The announcer stammers, utterly at a loss for words after witnessing the unbelievable destruction. Once the midterm evaluation is declared over, he frantically calls for the construction support team to get to the central auditorium immediately. Sometime later, Sehun waits nervously in an office, having been summoned by Dean Ryu Unha. The dean enters, apologizing for her tardiness as she was helping clean up the arena he destroyed. Sehun stands and apologizes for the mess he caused, but she is taken aback by his apology, asking what he could possibly mean by it. Confused, he asks if she didn't call him here to scold him for the property damage. She quickly denies it, explaining that the real reason she summoned him is something else entirely. But before she can finish her sentence, her stomach lets out an incredibly loud and embarrassing growl. Mortified, the dean tries to regain her composure after the unexpected interruption. Completely changing the subject, she surprises him by offering to pay 10 times the market price for his work, and formally asks if he would be willing to sell the 5-color fire blade and the fire-accumulating sheath to her. Stunned by the incredible offer, Sehun can only respond with a shocked, "What?" At that moment, a system notification pops up, announcing that a bond with the target Ryu Unha has been established. The chapter ends with a polite reminder against illegal sharing and spoilers. She acknowledges Sehun's impressive armaments, and this act of recognition unexpectedly establishes a level 1 bond between them. He is stunned that the bond formed so quickly, recalling that in his past life, it took feeding her multiple powerful weapons to achieve the same. Seeing this as a prime opportunity, he thanks her, already planning his next move. Without a moment's hesitation, he activates his bond extraction skill on the newly formed connection, and successfully extracts a supreme quality high-grade gluttony iron, a material that consumes other iron to generate heat. As the powerful new material materializes in his hand, he mutters, "It's done." Misunderstanding his words, a flustered Dean Ryu Enha asks if he's selling the item to her, to which he bluntly replies, no. As the confused Dean presses him about his statement, they are suddenly interrupted by Professor Kim In-keol at the door. The professor announces that the academy head wants to proceed with the presentation ceremony and has summoned Sehun. So he respectfully asks to take Cadet Sehun, and she, with a final curious glance, gives her consent. Sehun calmly bids the dean farewell, promising he'll see her later as he departs with the professor. Left alone in her office, a perplexed Ryu Yunha is startled by a loud growl from her own stomach. Meanwhile, Sehun is led to the heart of Babel Academy, the old main building known as the magnificent Marduk Mansion. He follows the professor through the grand, sunlit halls, absorbing the prestigious atmosphere of the academy's core. Just then, Professor Kim advises him to act respectfully, reminding him that the academy head generously overlooked the massive damage from his demonstration. Stopping before an ornate door, the professor warns that the academy head is on a completely different level than them. Sehun, however, coolly reassures his concerned professor, telling him not to worry. Upon entering, a calm voice from within the room calls out to him, Cadet Lee Sehun. Our protagonist finally meets the Ascension Emperor, Academy head Ludwig, whom he remembers as the hero who perished fighting a demon god in his past life. Observing the meticulously organized office, he notes that the academy head is as much of a perfectionist as he remembers. Ludwig begins the conversation, stating that all the armaments shown at the demonstration were interesting, and expresses his high expectations but also mentions having regrets, a word that immediately catches Sehun's attention. Sehun explains his own perfectionism, stating that he was fully prepared to throw his creations back into the furnace if they weren't perfect. As a tribute to the young man's immense talent and effort, Ludwig decides to bestow upon him 2 rewards. Sehun ponders the unexpected offer, as Ludwig prompts him to state what he needs. Seizing the chance, he boldly requests items that can increase his mana and memory capacity. In response, Academy head Ludwig begins to summon the promised rewards. A mysterious, floating, keyhole-shaped entity then appears before him to dispense the items. 2 hero-grade items are presented, the heavy ink rocks to absorb mana, and the dream ivory to cross the boundary between reality and dreams. Sehun is astonished. He recognizes that while the heavy ink rock is rare, finding dream ivory is an almost impossible feat. Despite the difficulty of using them at his current level, he smiles, confident that he already has a plan for the precious materials. The academy head observes his reaction and asks if he likes the rewards. With a respectful bow, our protagonist confirms that the items are absolutely perfect for his needs. After Sehun's departure, a disembodied voice questions Ludwig's decision. Ludwig's floating, keyhole-shaped familiar chides him, remarking that being so generous as to give 2 rewards is not like him. Ludwig justifies his actions, stating Sehun has the capacity to handle them, while his familiar notes that the student felt strangely like an old man. The academy head calmly explains that its perception is merely a reflection of Sehun's own profound depth. Gazing after the departed student, he admits that even he, the Ascension Emperor, cannot fathom the true extent of Lee Sehun's depth. The scene shifts to a bright new day, marking the beginning of classes at Babel Academy. Inside a classroom, Hans Barmut smugly rejects a classmate's lunch offer, boasting about his plans with a senior valedictorian. His friend is flabbergasted, shocked that he has connections with the third-year department valedictorian of Borsippa. Hans waves it off, bragging that their families are close and that he's just getting some friendly advice on academy life. But just as his sycophantic friend asks to join, the chatter is cut short by Lee Sehun's arrival. He enters the classroom, and his powerful aura immediately silences the students. The room remains tense and quiet as he walks past Hans and his cronies to take a seat. Hans is visibly unnerved by the chilling intensity in his rival's eyes, causing him to flinch away in fear. Sehun smirks, satisfied that Hans seems to have finally realized his place. Fuming silently, Hans clenches his fist under the desk, infuriated at being intimidated by a low-born bastard. The tension is broken as Professor Kim In-keol enters, commanding everyone to sit down. Standing before the class, he confirms that everyone is present and prepares to begin, and announces that for their first class, they'll start with introductions via a practical exercise. The professor then reveals a box filled with a unique material known as projection alloy. He explains that the alloy is extremely sensitive to mana, and demonstrates by injecting his own into a piece. In an instant, the alloy transforms into a blade, proving that any armament envisioned can be easily created. While the other students are amazed, Sehun inwardly acknowledges the professor's high-level skill. So he recognizes that Professor Kim is the real deal, the only person in the room with genuine, top-tier talent. The professor clarifies that the alloy's sensitivity also makes it useful for reflecting unconscious traits, allowing one to self-reflect. For this reason, creations made from this material are called alter egos, and crafting one will serve as their official self-introduction. The students shout an enthusiastic yes when told their alter egos will be exhibited in the main building for a week. Our guy realizes the high cost of the provided materials, marveling at the grandiosity of Babel's introduction assignment. Injecting his mana, Hans proudly materializes a flashy and ornate golden rapier. As the other students express their awe, Sehun scoffs, thinking that none of them possess the most important talent. Finally, Professor Kim calls on Lee Sehun to take his turn. Sehun decides that since he is already the department valedictorian, there's no longer any need to hide his true power. Resolving to make a statement, he decides he might as well go all out. With a flash of determination in his eyes, he prepares to unleash his full potential on the projection alloy. And an immense wave of energy erupts from his hand, signaling the creation of an alter ego far beyond anyone's expectations. Lee Se-hoon's alter ego is on display, and the buzzing crowd confirms the massive impact he's already made at the academy. Onlookers debate his talent, as some cynics dismiss his genius as mere hype for a freshman. Other students murmur in agreement, finding it hard to believe a first year could be on such a different level. A nearby plaque explains that his creation is an anomaly that absorbed 19 projection alloys, now displayed as a representation of his unique aptitude. A group of students, including Hans's friend, rationalize the success as a fluke, suggesting the department is just trying to create a star. However, Inoue Erika, the valedictorian of the support department, calmly interjects, stating she has a different opinion. And Jake Myers, the combat department valedictorian, smugly chimes in, siding with her against the popular opinion. The two prodigies agree that 20 projection alloys were likely insufficient to capture the full scope of Lee Se-hoon's potential. The scene transitions to the creation process, and our protagonist's hammer strikes with explosive force. The teaching assistant watches in awe, confirming that his timing was inhumanly precise. With every strike perfectly timed, the assistant notes that there hasn't been a single 0.01 second error in his entire process. Utterly defeated, he wonders what he could possibly teach a student who is already so far beyond him. Deciding it's pointless, the assistant simply skips the evaluation and moves on. After the assistant dismisses the class, Se-hoon remains behind, contemplating the standard-issue blades he was forced to create. With a familiar fire in his eyes, he grabs his hammer, ready to correct what he sees as an imperfection. He looks down at the batch of blades, clearly dissatisfied with the results. But just as he's about to smash the swords, a voice rings out, asking if he's planning to break them. Se-hoon turns to find the teaching assistant has returned, and explains that the swords from class are to be delivered and sold, so he can't just destroy them. He then clarifies that the cadets' budgets are supplemented by the external sales of the weapons they forge, giving them both real-world experience and funding. Seeing the young man's frustration, he asks what the problem is, his body or his mana. Se-hoon cracks a weary smile, admitting that for now, his weak physical body is the source of his dissatisfaction, and laments that while he needs to smith the heavy ink rock to create training tools, he currently lacks the stamina to even make an attempt. The assistant offers a simple solution, suggesting that using buffs would be a much faster way to overcome his physical limits than training. Our guy is struck by the simple logic, realizing he'd avoided relying on buffs in his past life and hadn't even considered it now. The idea dawns on him. He can use buffs to temporarily gain the strength needed to smith hero-grade materials. Genuinely grateful, he bows and thanks the assistant for the invaluable advice. But as the assistant turns to forge, Se-hoon stops him, intending to offer a piece of advice in return. He advises the assistant to reduce his mana usage to 70 and focus his strikes on a single point to improve his forging. Having dropped a piece of master-level wisdom, our protagonist casually walks away, leaving the assistant to ponder his words. The assistant is left dumbfounded, processing the fact that a freshman had just given him expert-level pointers. Speechless, he stares at the hammer, realizing the truth in the young prodigy's advice. Seeking to learn about buffs, Se-hoon heads to a different department, taking advantage of Babel's system that encourages autonomous learning. However, he reflects on the academy's strict rules. While freedom is encouraged, 3 failing grades mean immediate expulsion. The train then pulls into the station for the Department of Sorcery, his destination for finding a new skill. As the doors hiss open, he prepares to step out into a new department, and the first person he sees upon disembarking is none other than Inoue Erika, the valedictorian from the support department. One of her brutish followers rudely tells him to get out of the way. Unimpressed, Se-hoon retorts that they are the ones blocking the path and should be the ones to move. The follower bristles at the response, but she silences him with an intrigued stare. Erica steps forward, her curiosity piqued, and directly asks him where he's going. He states his intention to look for a minor in the Department of Sorcery, surprising her followers. To her companion's shock, she then offers to personally guide him. When one of her followers tries to remind her of a prior engagement, she coolly dismisses them, telling them to go on without her. And she icily shuts down their protests, making it clear she has no interest in their gathering as she scares them off with a hint of her power. As her dejected followers retreat, she and Se-hoon begin walking together. She asks what kind of minor he's looking for, trying to understand his purpose in her department. He explains his goal to learn about buffs. Specifically, he needs a physical enhancement buff that won't interfere with the delicate process of smithing. Erica suggests barrier arts, a choice that confuses him, as he always thought of them as purely defensive. Teasing that it depends on the application, she pulls out an ornate, wax-sealed invitation. She then expertly casts a complex barrier spell, weaving magical chains and runes around the envelope. With her spell complete, she hands the enchanted envelope to him and challenges him to try and tear it. As he tries to rip the paper, Se-hoon immediately senses there's more to the spell than simple durability enhancement, and instantly deduces the magic's true nature. It maintains its normal properties until strong force is applied, at which point it hardens, acting like a magical non-Newtonian fluid. Impressed, he notes that this technique is perfect for smithing, and she offers to help him find a professor for more complex applications. Recognizing her own family's spell formula, she offers to personally introduce him to the barrier composition professor, who married into her family. But just as she is about to ask for a favor in exchange, likely his attendance at the noblesse's gathering, she stops dead in her tracks. In a flash, he has completely dismantled her intricate barrier spell. She's left utterly stunned, unable to comprehend how he understood and unraveled her family's secret arts in mere seconds. Se-hoon coolly acknowledges that barrier arts do seem useful and thanks her for the advice before turning to leave. With the information he needs, he announces that he's going to register for classes. He then casually tells a still-shocked Erica to go have a meal with her followers, who had been trailing them the whole time. Her followers rush to her side, but she is silent, her eyes fixed on the spot where he stood. At her feet lie the shredded remains of the noblesse invitation, torn to pieces by his dismantling of her spell. Erica watches him go, her mind reeling. She thinks to herself, I gave it to you, realizing he took the information and repaid her by demonstrating his superiority. Lee Se-hoon and Inoue Erica arrive at the sprawling campus of the Department of Sorcery. As they walk together, other students start to gossip, wondering why the valedictorian of the refining department is with Erica. Se-hoon smirks at the spreading rumors, musing to himself that if she truly had feelings for him, a bond would have already formed. He then explains to Erica that he has to take a placement test before he can enroll in the class he wants. Erica leads him to the test site, a vast forest, which leaves Se-hoon questioning the strange location. Inside, other applicants are wandering aimlessly through the woods, completely lost and unable to find the test area. Our guy dryly wonders if the sorcery department's test is just some kind of treasure hunt. Finding the whole situation annoying, he strides forward into the mysterious forest. Se-hoon then casually walks straight through an invisible barrier, shattering it on contact and shocking the two proctors waiting on the other side. The stunned assistant and Professor Perry mechanically declare that he has passed the first test. Completely oblivious to what just happened, our protagonist simply asks, "Pardon?" In a flashback, Professor Robert Perry recalls noticing that Year's valedictorian, Erica, had shown an interest in Borsippa's valedictorian, Se-hoon. His assistant confirms it, showing the professor a picture of the two together, and explaining that it's why she suddenly applied for a basic lecture. Professor Perry laments that while applications have tripled due to her presence, the added hassle isn't worth celebrating. He then reveals that at the request of a young master Inoue, he decided to add a special test this year. That special test is the Disorienting Soul Labyrinth, a powerful illusionary barrier. While the labyrinth is a basic barrier that distorts the senses, it's completely undetectable to anyone without a background in sorcery. Back in the present, Professor Perry is flabbergasted, realizing Se-hoon broke through the complex barrier using nothing but sheer instinct. The proctors announce to the group of candidates that they have all successfully passed the first test. For the second test, designed to separate students into different classes, an arrogant, freckled student volunteers to go first. The student smugly eyes Erica, believing this is his big chance to impress her. Professor Perry explains the test. They must dismantle an active barrier using only mana. As the test begins, the student confidently places his hands on the glowing red web-like barrier. The barrier is shaped like a spider web, with a mobile spider acting as its core. This core constantly flees from any mana contact, and as long as it exists, the web will infinitely regenerate. The student strains, realizing his mana reserves are insufficient to surround the entire spell formula using the standard textbook method. As a desperate last resort, he decides to try and pressure the fleeing core with sheer speed. He completes the task in 2 minutes and 23 seconds, but the professor admonishes him for not grasping the barrier's structure properly. The student meekly thanks the professor for his feedback while Erica looks on, thoroughly unimpressed by his performance. A string of other candidates are shown trying and failing to dismantle the difficult barrier. Professor Perry informs the exhausted and defeated students that they will all be starting in the basic class. With the others finished, the professor announces that it is now Inoue Erica's turn. She calmly approaches the barrier as her own powerful aura begins to manifest. In an instant, she completely dismantles the spell formula, causing the entire barrier to collapse and leaving the other students speechless. An onlooker marvels at her power, acknowledging that such skill is to be expected from a department valedictorian. The professor clocks her time at 22 seconds but points out that the standard method would have been 2 seconds faster, a critique she humbly accepts. With only one person left, Professor Perry turns his attention to the final applicant, Lee Se-hoon. And he is skeptical, noting that the protagonist doesn't look like much, but our protagonist is ready to prove him wrong. However, instead of attacking, Se-hoon simply crouches down to inspect the barrier, confusing everyone watching. The spectators whisper amongst themselves, wondering what he's doing and if he even realizes the test has started. Se-hoon suddenly has an epiphany, recognizing that the barrier's regenerative properties resemble the heavy ink rock's material. He then recalls the rock's unique forging requirement. All stimulation must be injected simultaneously to prevent it from reverting and repairing itself. From a distance, the professor watches in confusion, wondering what on earth the young man is doing. Just as the proctor is about to intervene, Erica calmly raises a hand, telling him to leave Se-hoon be. Se-hoon devises a plan. If he can't dismantle it normally, perhaps he can hold on to the accumulated stimulation, just like with the heavy ink rock. Applying his smithing knowledge, he begins to inject his own fire mana directly into the web structure. His blazing mana flows through the web and begins to overload the spider-shaped core. The complex barrier vanishes, leaving only a few smoldering embers where he is kneeling. Se-hoon calmly stands up, dusting his hands as he announces he is done. He smirks, triumphant in the knowledge that he has also figured out the secret to smithing the notoriously difficult heavy ink rock. He stands confidently as the proctors, Erica, and the other students stare in absolute bewilderment. The assistant proctor stammers out the time, an incredibly slow 7 minutes and 45 seconds. However, Professor Perry gravely explains that the time is meaningless, as Se-hoon will now be able to destroy that same barrier in mere seconds. He realizes with horror that the young man didn't just dismantle the barrier, he analyzed it and created an entirely new, efficient formula for destroying the spell itself. As Se-hoon walks away, Erica watches him, deeply. Meanwhile, Professor Perry contemplates the terrifying potential of his smithing skills being combined with sorcery and shares his fear about what kind of monstrous items Se-hoon might create with such an unprecedented synergy of skills. The Babel administration sends out a request for a faculty member to supervise first-year cadet Lee Se-hoon as he attempts to smith hero-grade materials. Immediately, a teaching assistant's phone is flooded with replies from professors eager to oversee the prodigious freshman. But he notes that no one from Vice Dean Michael's faction applied, confirming rumors that they are still bitter about Hans Barmut being pushed to second place. Just as he prepares to choose a supervisor from the flood of applicants, a new, shocking message arrives. In an unprecedented move, the message declares that Dean Ryu Unha herself will personally oversee Se-hoon's smithing session. So when the dean herself shows up at the workshop, Se-hoon is understandably taken aback and wonders why she's there. She coolly explains that as the dean, she has come to personally verify his skills. Seeing no way out of it, Se-hoon simply resolves to focus and work hard on his creation under her watchful eye. He begins the first step of smithing the heavy ink rock, one of the hero-grade materials he received from the academy head, and explains that he will use the most difficult method, the dark curtain process, to refine the material. The process involves placing the rock into a special container which creates a pocket of pure darkness, obscuring it from view. Using only his mana, he must meticulously separate the impurities from the rock, which increases its purity at the cost of its size. However, he acknowledges that this advanced technique is less about simple smithing and more akin to the reconstruction of matter itself. Meanwhile, she watches with a flicker of surprise, realizing the immense difficulty of the technique he has chosen. After reducing the rock to a quarter of its original size, our protagonist decides that's as far as he can go without compromising the final product's performance. For the second step, he summons a swirl of crimson flame, preparing to refine it for the next stage. With intense focus, he unleashes a powerful torrent of fire that fills the workshop with his mana. He then filters the raw power of the crimson flames, extracting only the specific type of fire he needs. The result is a stabilized, green, flowing wildfire, a special flame that maintains a constant temperature once formed. With the fire prepared, he moves on to the third and most physically demanding step of the process, and begins striking the heavy ink rock with a hammer wreathed in the flowing wildfire, hammering non-stop to reshape the material. As she watches him work, the dean muses that even if his skills grant him fire immunity, he must still be enduring immense pain from the strain. She wonders how much pain and effort he must have put himself through to reach this level of mastery. As the sun begins to set, Se-hoon's relentless hammering continues unabated. After watching him for hours, even the formidable dean can't help but let out a tired yawn. 4 grueling hours of non-stop high-level smithing have now passed. Finally, having absorbed the powerful flame to its absolute limit, the properties of the heavy ink rock begin to change. The distortion stops, and the now processed rock begins to liquefy, signaling the end of the hammering phase. Se-hoon then carefully melts the processed heavy ink rock, preparing to cast it. However, Ryu Unha is shocked when he pours the molten metal into a mold, realizing this unconventional casting method will drastically change its properties. She watches intently, trying to decipher the logic behind his seemingly reckless decision. But just as she thinks he is finished, he realizes he can take it one step further, initiating a fourth, unplanned step. In a stroke of genius, he uses the barrier dismantling formula he just learned to slow the material's transformation and construct a mana circuit within it. He masterfully applies the sorcery formula, forcing the hardening material to crack and reform around the newly embedded mana circuit. His daring gambit pays off, completing the Ink Spider bracelet and rewarding him with the new skill, Black Spirit Thread. The system then displays the final product, a rare-grade Ink Spider bracelet that absorbs the user's mana to increase its weight and can unleash an explosive ring skill. Se-hoon barely manages a triumphant smile and whispers, "Success," before sighing from complete exhaustion. Just then, the dean's stomach lets out an embarrassing growl. An awkward silence hangs between the exhausted blacksmith and the blushing, hungry dean. Se-hoon catches his breath, feeling the profound exhaustion from having pushed his body and skills to their absolute breaking point. Ryu Unha recognizes the resonance phenomenon between the multiple bracelets he crafted, acknowledging it as an impressive feat. He confirms, adding that if done correctly, the bracelets might even produce a powerful set effect when worn together. Then, as a bizarre form of thanks, he offers the leftover metal scraps to the dean, calling them a palate cleanser. His strange offer catches her completely off guard. Intrigued, she activates her unique skill, Soul Smelting Furnace, to consume the metal. After taking a bite of the scrap metal, she nonchalantly declares that it's quite edible, shocking him. She clarifies that, metaphorically, the taste is similar to fried crumbs. Our protagonist realizes that his perfectionism has inadvertently caused him to craft materials that perfectly suit the dean's strange palate. Seeing an easy way to raise his bond level with her, he smoothly replies that he's glad she likes it. Ryu Unha remarks that it's a bit of a shame to eat the scraps while looking at the superior completed bracelets. Changing the subject, she pointedly asks when he plans to sell her the 5-color fire blade and its sheath. Se-hoon stuns her by stating he won't be selling them yet, causing her to wonder if her offer price was too low. He explains that he needs the equipment for the upcoming subjugation class, cheekily adding the adage that hunger is the best spice. He then promises to let her be the first to know when he creates equipment worthy of her, leaving the dean both flustered and excited. After confirming that the smithing is truly finished, she pops another tasty metal scrap into her mouth. She dismisses Se-hoon, telling him to leave the cleanup to the staff, much to his relief as he has no strength left. However, the moment he tries to stand, his body gives out and he collapses. The dean catches him just in time, and he admits with a weak smile that he mismanaged his stamina. Deciding to take him back to his dorm, she casually asks if he happens to have a fear of heights. Before Se-hoon can even finish his negative reply, Ryu Unha effortlessly scoops him up into a princess carry, much to his shock. With a powerful leap, she then launches herself and the bewildered young man off the workshop's high balcony. The two of them soar gracefully through the night sky, her fiery red hair trailing behind them like a comet's tail. Mid-flight, she is amazed to realize that the metal scraps she ate had drawn out a significant amount of her own power. While being carried through the air by the S-rank hero, Se-hoon smirks, reflecting on how wildly different this timeline is from his original one. From the courtyard below, Inoue Erika spots the fiery streak flying across the sky, unaware of who it is. Clutching an invitation she needs to deliver, she waits patiently, wondering when Lee Se-hoon will finally show up, and as she waits in the cool night air, she lets out a sudden, small sneeze. A new post on the Babel Academy freeboard notes that Inoue Erika, the UR department valedictorian, has been waiting in front of the refining department building for 3 hours. While other students freak out about the post and demand it be taken down, Sehun remains completely unbothered by the commotion. He casually sips his drink, figuring that if whatever she wanted was important, she would simply find him again later. In class, a new instructor, Ricardo Miles, introduces himself as the one in charge of the Understanding Tools course. He immediately kicks off the class with the surprise challenge, a race to the training center, with the last person to arrive having to run 20 laps. The students panic and bolt from their seats, caught off guard by the sudden physical test in what was supposed to be a theory class. Though confused about why a theory class is starting with a run, Sehun joins the frantic dash. However, his notoriously low stamina immediately becomes a problem as he struggles to keep up with the other students. As expected, he is the last one to arrive, earning him the penalty of 20 grueling laps around the track. Reluctantly, Sehun begins his punishment run while the other students, already recovered, look on. They mock his bottom-tier stamina, questioning if he's even capable of intermediate smithing. Just then, the Professor Ricaros calls the exhausted class to attention, and explains that while the class was originally about the theory of armaments, recent flameblade hunts have forced a change in the curriculum. The Flameblade Hunters are a notorious group that specifically targets and attacks blacksmiths who craft hero-grade or higher fire attribute blades. Sehun recognizes the unsolved case from his past life when he hears the instructor's point that ultimately, a blacksmith's only real defense is their own body. Therefore, Ricardo declares that in this class, they will not only learn about tools, but also acquire techniques to protect themselves, much to the students' enthusiastic approval. As the instructor announces that today's lesson will be on swords, Sehun resolves to be more careful this time around, and realizes that to handle future threats, he must first address his most glaring weakness, his terrible stamina. Thankfully, the ink spider bracelet he crafted is performing perfectly, increasing his weight by absorbing mana to enable his gravity-manipulating explosive ring skill. The bracelet has already boosted all his stats by an average of 5, and he vows to make his body combat-ready by the end of the year. Just as Sehun collapses from his run, Ricaros calls him over, ending his brief respite. Taking a moment to catch his breath, he silently mutters the name of his new gravity-manipulating skill, Explosive Ring. Professor Ricaros remarks that he is in better shape than expected after the punishing run. The instructor then hands him a practice sword, intending to see if swordsmanship is a suitable path for him. Sehun takes the sword, noting to himself that the gravity effect of his ink spider bracelet will make it difficult to move properly. Ready to demonstrate, he decides to try using an unrefined swordsmanship technique he remembers from his past. He executes a basic but effective swing, but the instructor easily blocks it. Watching from the sidelines, other students comment that while his form isn't bad, he seems incredibly slow and exhausted. Ricaros, however, is stunned, realizing that the young man's form is excellent and his sword knows the exact path it must take. He notes that his movements are hasty, but decides it's something that needs to be addressed immediately. As Sehun's eyes flash with focus, Ricaros has a shocking vision of his student's blade cutting through the very fabric of space and time. The hallucination is so vivid that the instructor feels a genuine sense of danger from the freshman's practice swing. Sehun then stops his sword near the instructor's neck, bringing the spar to an abrupt and shocking halt. Ricaros is left shaken, questioning if he truly just got scared by a mere technical cadet and hallucinated the entire exchange. Deeply impressed and slightly unnerved, he asks Sehun just who taught him that swordsmanship. Sehun sweats, internally recalling how he actually learned the technique from a master swordsman in his past life, all in just 10 minutes. He remembers the master, Ma Guangsu, casually dismissing a debt and telling him to just pay it back next time. His memory flashes back to desperately offering to learn a technique instead of paying with money, a bargain that was reluctantly accepted. To avoid a complicated explanation, Sehun simply tells the flustered instructor that he learned by watching videos of other heroes' battles. Brushing aside the flimsy excuse, Ricaros is so impressed that he asks if Sehun is interested in learning swordsmanship properly. He then offers to write him a letter of recommendation for the exclusive body control lecture at the combat department, Akar QFE. Later that afternoon, Sehun arrives at the Akar QF building with the recommendation in hand. He is immediately greeted by a strange and tense atmosphere inside the lecture hall. He witnesses the combat valedictorian, Jake Myers, begging an older man to teach him, only to be repeatedly and angrily refused. Sehun instantly recognizes the professor as Ma Guangsu, a retired S-class hero and one of his regular, albeit degenerate, customers from his past life. This is the legendary swordbreaker, Ma Guangsu. Sehun is shocked, finding it hard to believe that the man he knew as a gambling addict and alcoholic was actually a professor. When Professor Ma asks who he is, Sehun introduces himself and presents the recommendation from Professor Regresses. Jake helpfully informs the professor that Sehun is this year's highly touted valedictorian for the refining department, Borsippa. Ma Guangsu looks Sehun over, unimpressed, muttering that no matter how he looks at him, the boy seems completely mediocre. Turning his attention back to Jake, the professor asks sarcastically if he's truly that desperate to learn from him. Fed up, he points at Sehun and declares that if Jake can beat him, he will finally accept him as a student. Professor Ma sets the terms for the two valedictorians, a single match where the first person to land a valid hit wins. With the challenge set, he prepares to start the impromptu duel, and signals the beginning of the match between the combat valedictorian and the blacksmith. Sehun takes a relaxed stance and calmly readies himself for the fight. Ma Guangsu analyzes his posture, identifying it as a state of relaxation, meant to maximize flexibility by removing all tension from the body. Jake, also recognizing the stance, knows the standard counter is grappling, not striking, and prepares his move. Professor Ma scoffs at the mind games, annoyed that the hotshots are posturing instead of fighting and finding it all incredibly boring. But suddenly, Sehun explodes forward, closing the distance in an instant and catching Jake completely by surprise. But Jake easily blocks the attack. Our guy is shocked by Jake's incredible strength as he's caught in his grip. Using his momentum, Jake effortlessly throws him clean off his feet. Then, in the split second before our guy hits the ground, he activates the explosive ring skill on his bracelet. However, the backlash from using the skill and the physical exertion caused Sehun to grunt in pain. But as his attack hits its mark, he finally lands a valid blow on Jake. Blood drips from Jake's nose. Lying on the ground but victorious, Sehun smirks at his defeated opponent and asks, "I was a bit faster, right?" Following his swift victory, Lee Sehun reflects on his attack while a defeated Jake Myers nurses his ankle under the watchful eye of Professor Ma Guangsu. Professor Ma startles Jake by ordering everyone else out, announcing his intention to teach Sehun alone as promised. But Sehun audaciously suggests that since he beat the valedictorian, perhaps the professor should be teaching the loser instead. He then berates Jake, calling the combat department's valedictorian pathetic for losing to a student from the refining department. Professor Ma agrees with him, acknowledging that Jake needs to become competent enough to earn his place in the class. To Jake's elation, he agrees to train him as well, telling him he'll schedule a time for him to show up. Overjoyed, Jake bows deeply in gratitude, and the professor curtly tells him to get going. Now alone with our protagonist, Professor Ma declares that he has something to discuss with him privately. Just then, he demands that Sehun demonstrate the sword technique he used on Regresses, prompting him to ready his sword. Without hesitation, Sehun executes a powerful slash, showcasing the raw form of his combat ability. However, Professor Ma easily deflects his attack, causing his sword to slip from his hand and fall to the ground, and explains the nature of his technique, calling it a first-sight kill, designed for a single, decisive blow. He critiques the technique, calling the concept good, but the execution crude, noting its major weakness after the initial attack. He then mutters that he would have broken the limbs of anyone else who praised this technique, an indirect jab at its original teacher, none other than himself. After that, he says to Sehun, "Just you watch, I will build a proper body onto this skeletal technique." Our guy slyly confirms his enrollment in the class, to which a slightly bemused Professor Ma agrees. His goal achieved, he politely bows and excuses himself for the day, leaving the professor to his thoughts. Watching him leave, Professor Ma can't help but comment on how surprisingly stiff and formal the young prodigy is. Just as Sehun leaves the dojo, however, a cheerful Jake Myers calls out to him, having waited outside. Sehun is surprised to see him, and Jake eagerly rushes over to speak with him. He excitedly explains that he has something to give him and hands over a formal, wax-sealed invitation. The invitation is for Noblesse, an elite student club, and Sehun realizes this is likely what Inoue Erika had intended to give him earlier. Jake admits the club is full of stuck-up jerks, but thinks it's a good opportunity, while Sehun expresses his hesitation to accept. Insisting, Jake explains that it's a token of gratitude, as Sehun's victory indirectly helped him get into the professor's class too. Moved by his sincerity, Sehun accepts the invitation with a simple expression of thanks. As he walks away, he considers his minor subjects and decides he'd like to try one from the Borsippa department next. While lost in thought about potential minors like enchanting, he accidentally bumps into another student. A young woman grabs his arm, and her hand on his ink spider bracelet immediately draws his focus. Her eyes light up with fascination as she examines the bracelet, eagerly asking if he made it himself. He cautiously confirms that he did, sensing her intense interest in his craftsmanship. With a keen, almost predatory smile, she offers to enchant his unique armament for him. Her obsessive interest in his work is so strong that it instantly forges a bond between them. Sehun immediately recognizes her as Leah Claudel, a genius enchanter from his past life who is famous for creating a legendary armament. Later at a cafe, Leah is already completely engrossed, marveling that his bracelet is made from the notoriously difficult heavy ink rock. Deep in thought, she analyzes the bracelet's potential, muttering that it's far too good to waste on simple enchantment formulas. She laments her predicament, overwhelmed by the sheer potential of the item, while Sehun calmly asks if the armament isn't good. Leah passionately clarifies that the problem is the opposite. The bracelet has too many enchanting possibilities because of its incredible compatibility. Overwhelmed by choice, she can't decide which formula to use, prompting Sehun to get her attention. Our guy then casually informs the stumped prodigy that he has more information for her. He then reveals the bracelet's resonance phenomenon, a piece of information that sends Leah into a state of ecstatic shock. But their meeting is interrupted by an imposing young man who approaches their table and asks about Sehun. Our guy introduces himself as a first-year student, while Leah, now fully smitten, enthusiastically introduces herself as a third-year student. The newcomer, one of Erika's followers, ignores her and curtly demands that Sehun follow him. Recognizing one of Erika's lackeys, Sehun dismisses him for rudely interrupting their conversation. Unfazed by the interruption, he tells the follower to say what he needs to say right there. The follower demands that Sehun apologize to Lady Erika for the public disrespect of tearing up her invitation. Sehun bluntly retorts that Erika herself was the one who told him to tear it. While the follower concedes the point, he reveals his real grievance is that Sehun accepted a similar invitation from Jake Myers immediately after. Growing weary of the drama, our protagonist sarcastically asks if Erika sent him to complain. The follower claims he's acting on his own initiative, a claim that earns a disbelieving smirk from Leah. A flashback reveals the follower's deep-seated resentment, viewing Sehun as a washout who has slighted his master, Erika. Losing his temper completely, he bellows in fury at the perceived insult from a washout. He then unleashes an illusion-based attack, sneering that Sehun shouldn't get a big head from his recent success. He boasts that Babel is filled with students far more talented than Sehun could ever hope to be. Sehun coolly provokes him by asking if he's talking about himself, just as the illusion begins to take shape. Enraged by the taunt, the follower screams for him to shut up and unleashes the full force of his shadowy illusion. As spectral wolves lunge towards them, Leah cries out in fear, but Sehun remains calm. The illusions phase right through them, and he correctly deduces that they're not just mana, but illusions created using daggers as a medium. The follower is stunned that his technique was figured out, but Sehun simply offers a cryptic, "Who knows?" With a predatory smile, he remarks that the daggers sounded delicious as he activates his Gluttony Iron Bond imprint. As the Gluttony Iron begins to devour the metal daggers fueling the illusion, the follower screams in anguish for his 1,000,001 equipment. Sehun savors the power, remarking that with a taste like this, it's no wonder one would go crazy. Harnessing the power of the supreme-grade Gluttony Iron, he prepares to unleash the Explosive Ring skill. In an instant, he closes the distance and gets ready for the attack. He then lands a powerful punch squarely on the follower's torso. The blow sends his attacker crashing to the ground, shattering the illusion and ending the confrontation in an instant. Without missing a beat, Sehun turns back to the flabbergasted Leah, casually addressing her as senior. He calmly asks the enchanting prodigy if she has any recommendations for a lecture in her department. Leah is left utterly speechless, blinking in disbelief at the whirlwind of events and his nonchalant display of power. A flash-forward reveals her future self recommending the ancient enchanting class, confirming Sehun has successfully charmed the prodigy. A flash-forward reveals her future self recommending the ancient enchanting class, confirming Sehun has successfully charmed the prodigy. After the confrontation, a weary follower stumbles away, cursing the toll the fight took on him. As he murmurs, impressed by the freshman's reaction speed, a woman stops him and asks to inspect the dagger he used. The woman is revealed to be Inoue Erika, much to the surprise of her subordinate, who asks when she arrived. Erika takes the dagger from her flustered follower, telling him not to report the incident to her brother, as she will handle the family head herself. As she inspects the weapon, she notes the anti-theft enchantment engraved on it, which confirms its use as a catalyst. A bead of sweat drips down her face as she realizes Sehun didn't just win, he created the counterskill based on her and Professor Robert's magic. She internally reassesses him, realizing his aptitude for smithing and magic might be even higher than S grade and A grade, respectively. Back in his seat, Sehun is stunned when a system window announces that a bond has been established with Inoue Erika. He inspects the 10 crude but usable daggers he received as compensation from her follower, noting they'll work well with his black spirit thread. During Professor Kim's lecture on theories he already knows, a bored Se-hoon finds himself dozing off. Professor Kim In-keol then announces the end of the theoretical explanation and the beginning of the practical exam. He then demonstrates how a single piece of metal's form can change completely based on how its mana arrangement is modified, and explains that this application of metal deformation is what determines a weapon's versatility. Professor Kim stresses that it is crucial for a blacksmith to perfectly grasp the potential of the metals they handle. Se-hoon wakes up with a start as the professor announces the practical exercise, metal deformation using iron ingots. An assistant hands out the specially prepared sensitive iron ingots as the professor instructs the students to create a 3-centimeter deep scratch in the center. Our guy notices that the professor hasn't completely rejected magic smithing when the professor gives the students a 10-minute time limit and tells them to begin. While the professor looks on stoically, many students cry out in frustration as they fail to properly manipulate the iron ingots. Se-hoon and Hans Barmut simultaneously announce their completion of the first task, well ahead of the rest of the class. Impressed, Professor Kim allows the two of them to move on to the next, more difficult stage of the exam. He presents a complex mana arrangement as an example and challenges the two students to apply it. Hans smirks, confident he can win this round, while Professor Kim reveals an even more intricate mana arrangement for the next step. While Se-hoon remains perfectly still, Hans eagerly begins manipulating his ingot, sensing a chance to seize victory. He gloats, vowing to perfect the intricate design so everyone can see his superior skill. But his showboating is interrupted when Professor Kim sternly calls out his name. The professor commands a confused Hans to return the now deformed iron ingot to its original shape. Hans struggles, realizing with horror that the mana arrangement within the ingot is completely ruined and won't respond. The professor explains that his processing method was flawed from the start, causing the ingot to break down, but Hans protests that he was just following instructions. Professor Kim simply reiterates his earlier lesson: a blacksmith must perfectly grasp the potential of their materials, and clarifies that when a manipulated arrangement cannot be restored, the equipment is considered deteriorated, not just deformed. After that, he advises a humbled Hans to carefully revisit this fundamental lesson, to which he can only quietly agree. Just then, Hans wonders if Se-hoon noticed the subtle trap in the professor's lesson. But he dismisses the thought, figuring Se-hoon just got lucky, and then Se-hoon effortlessly reverses the complex deformation of his own ingot. With a subtle flourish, his ingot reforms into a new, sleek shape, proving the technique works. The other students murmur in disbelief, wondering how he succeeded when the professor had just explained why it was impossible. Professor Kim, having witnessed the impossible feat, asks Cadet Lee Se-hoon to demonstrate the deformation again. Realizing he's given the professor the wrong idea, Se-hoon sheepishly shows his restored, yet still complexly shaped, ingot. He quickly backpedals, explaining that his success is only possible because the ingots are specially adjusted for cadets, claiming it would be impossible with standard iron. Professor Kim looks on, feigning acceptance of the excuse, but internally marvels that he could have missed such a detail. He recalls the legendary blacksmith, Saint of Holy Fires, Lee Kentz, a summit climber and master craftsman. He then reflects on how Lee Kentz, during his time as an S-rank hero, created a fundamental principle that has remained undisputed for decades. This core principle, the truth of iron, is the deformation formula that all blacksmiths follow, a formula Se-hoon just seemed to defy. The professor muses that he couldn't have found another way. Do I think it would be possible for this guy? Meanwhile, our guy murmurs that if he notices this time, it would be the second time. As the sun sets over Babel Academy, the class finally comes to an end. Just as Se-hoon is about to leave, Professor Kim dismisses the rest of the class but asks him to stay for a moment. Professor Kim presents him with a rare grade Crimson Fire Jade, calling it an admission gift for helping him get to Babel, and explains that absorbing the jade's essence will permanently strengthen his Crimson Flame attribute. Se-hoon graciously accepts the powerful gift, knowing it will be a great help. As Se-hoon turns to leave, Professor Kim casually asks if he has any interest in taking the minor course he teaches. Se-hoon correctly guesses the course is Armament Fundamental Studies, which surprises the professor. He confirms that he knows of the class, recognizing it as one with a massive budget supported by Babel. Se-hoon internally notes that he never heard of Professor Kim In-keol in his previous life, despite the man's current prominence. From this, he deduces that the professor's ending in the original timeline was likely not a good one. Despite the professor's unknown fate, he agrees to take the course, noting that the man is currently receiving a lot of attention. When the professor expresses concern about his workload, Sehun nonchalantly states this will only be his fourth minor course, shocking the professor with his ambition. Professor Kim shakes his hand, looking forward to working with him, and Sehun agrees as well. The handshake establishes another bond, this time with Kim In-kyeol, allowing Sehun to extract a high-grade flame-bearing iron. Back in his dorm, he contemplates a forbidden concept. If one can extract metal from a person, they can also forge and process that person's body, and acknowledges the established norm that blacksmiths should only use one mana attribute, as multiple types can cause fatal conflicts during precise work. Holding the Crimson Fire Jade, he declares that he is different and prepares to use his internal mana to block its heat. As his body is drained of its own mana, it naturally begins to draw in the potent essence of the Crimson Flame from the Jade. He reveals his plan. As a blacksmith, he will construct a dedicated mana circuit solely for the Crimson Flame inside his own body. With his body enveloped in red flame and a spiritual smithing hammer manifested, he begins the process. Just then, he commences the dangerous act of smithing a new power system directly within himself. A system window confirms the success of the procedure, showing his Crimson Flame skill has been strengthened from rank F to E. He acquires the S-grade skill Spirit Body Smithing Magics and receives a significant boost to all his stats. He then recalls a painful memory from his past life, where his mentor found him collapsed and chided him for giving up despite having the materials. His S-rank blacksmith mentor had asked him, "You're not an idiot, so are you just going to accept that?" Remembering her words, he steels his resolve, affirming that he must make use of everything he can. Alone in his room, he vows that this time he won't have any regrets, whether he's up against an enemy or an ally. In blacksmithing class, the teaching assistant announces that their final project for the semester will be supplied both within the academy and to external clients. He emphasizes that their performance today will determine the course of their entire first semester, urging them all to do their best. With the stakes set so high, the students scramble to their stations and immediately begin working at their forges. Lee Se-hoon, however, is displeased with his progress, noting that his current physical body can't keep up with his skills, resulting in a flawed blade. Resolved not to make excuses, he refocuses, knowing this is no time to be taking it easy. And so, he unleashes a flurry of expert techniques, heating, hammering, and quenching the steel with masterful control. After inspecting the nearly finished blade, he lets out a sigh, judging his own expert craftsmanship as merely decent. He knows that with the limited time remaining, he can't complete all his work to a high enough standard to secure a larger budget. So, he decides it's better to forge one perfect item, setting the finished blade on the table for further improvements. As he begins his work, a faint familiar sound starts to echo in his mind. He recognizes it instantly. It's the sound of the world ending, the roar of the perishing sea from his past life, and recalls how this traumatic sound, paradoxically, always signaled when he was in the perfect state of mind to create his best work. Harnessing that intense focus now, he forges a blade with an edge that is permanently engraved into its very essence. A system window suddenly appears, declaring the completion of the armament White Light Longswords and the acquisition of the new C-rank skill White Light Style. Its stats confirm the blade is a rare-grade, high-quality masterpiece forged by a blacksmith with outstanding skills. Se-hoon nonchalantly remarks that his sword is only decent for being made of normal iron, leaving a nearby student completely dumbfounded. Still, he feels a small sense of accomplishment, glad that the skills from his past life are slowly returning. Meanwhile, the other students are utterly demoralized by his prodigious talent, with one comically wondering if he should just drop out. The following Saturday morning, Se-hoon meets with the enchanting prodigy, Leah Claudel. She is surprised he wants to see her enchanting but agrees, leading him to her more secluded workplace. As they trek far into the countryside, she teases him, saying he can't expect to see her skill so easily. They finally arrive at the Akar Quith hardware store, which she proudly announces is her workshop. She bounds inside, cheerfully calling out for her grandmother. From the shadowy depths of the store, a figure emerges. Leah's grandmother Helena appears, curtly telling her granddaughter that she isn't deaf. The older woman eyes Se-hoon suspiciously and bluntly asks if he's Leah's boyfriend, causing both of them to blush and deny it. Upon learning he is the valedictorian, she scoffs that Babel must be declining if they're accepting such a soft-looking guy. Unfazed, Se-hoon politely introduces himself to the hardware store owner as a first year from the refining department. Helena, however, impatiently tells her granddaughter to stop messing around and get to work, complaining about a pile-up caused by other freshmen. Leah simply directs Se-hoon towards the back, telling him that her workshop is this way. As he follows, Se-hoon observes the shop and notes that Helena's skills seem much better than he had anticipated. While Leah frets about her workload, he can't help but wonder why a skilled enchanter like her grandmother is running a simple hardware store. Once there, Leah shows him her enchant palette, a set of powders made from ground magic stones. He correctly deduces that her job is to restore damaged enchantment formulas, which she confirms. She explains that this line of work lets her earn money and practice enchanting to her heart's content, without having to worry about material costs. She then demonstrates by delicately applying the magic powders to a pan, causing a complex enchantment circle to glow to life. Sehun, watching her, reflects on why he came, remembering that Leah seemed to be in a slump during their last encounter. And as he watches her meticulous work, he believes he has now identified the cause of her slump and its solution. He smiles slightly, acknowledging to himself that her ability to immerse herself in her work is a genuine talent. And he thinks to himself that the enchantment process resonates with an item's mana arrangement to grant a special effect. As he recalls his recently praised engraving skill, Helena appears behind him and challenges him to prove his talent by using it on one of her items. Feeling like he's being bossed around, he listens as she condescendingly tells him to pick anything from a nearby pile. Sehun, however, is intrigued by the challenge and the chance to use the high-quality whetstone she provided. Helena watches with a skeptical smirk as he selects a dull, ordinary-looking kitchen knife for his demonstration. He inspects the blade and confidently states that its even wear suggests its owner knows how to properly handle it. Then, he praises the whetstone's quality, certain that its compressed mana particles will allow him to sharpen the edge to its absolute limit. With incredible speed and precision, he begins restoring the knife's edge on the whetstone. Helena watches in utter disbelief, shocked that a mere freshman could possess such a high level of skill. Suddenly, a triumphant Leah, having just finished her task, startles her grandmother by shouting, "Done." Completely unaware of what just transpired, she asks when her grandmother arrived, only to be affectionately called a brat in return. At this, Leah smirks, correctly guessing that Helena had tried to test him but ended up getting schooled instead. A flustered Helena tells her to shut up and gives her a sharp flick on the forehead. After that, she calmly asks if he is quite finished, and our guy says yes and presents the knife in front of her. He humbly notes that this is the best he can do for now, promising to do better next time, which further amazes her. Thoroughly flustered by the freshman who just outclassed her, she quickly tells them both to get going. Leah laughs off her grandmother's crankiness and happily leads a bemused Sehun out of the store. Left alone, Helena stands in stunned silence, staring at the masterfully sharpened knife. At that moment, Professor Ma Guangsu bursts in, loudly greeting his sister. Helena chides him for being so loud, and he asks, "Orders are backed up right now, what about the kitchen knife?" As he complains about her nagging, she seems to disapprove of his hobby, wondering when the combat professor will finally quit his restaurant gig. Ignoring her, Ma Guangsu excitedly spots his knife and picks it up. But the moment he touches it, he freezes, stunned by its quality, and asks his sister if she sharpened it while drinking, but she denies it, saying it wasn't her or her assistants. When a baffled Ma Guangsu demands to know who did the work, his sister calmly reveals it was a freshman. She clarifies that a freshman who just entered Babel this year was the one who performed the masterful sharpening. And as Sehun walks off into the distance, Ma Guangsu is left completely bewildered, wondering who on earth this unbelievable freshman could possibly be. Leah confirms that the hardware store grandma, Helena, was indeed a professor at the refining department who retired 5 years ago. Sehun asks if there's a story behind her retirement, to which Leah notes that many professors have left the refining department over the last decade. Our guy internally connects this exodus of professors to the department's future decline, realizing it's a problem he can't afford to overlook. Eager for his feedback, she asks how her enchantment was, and he bluntly appraises it as merely decent, though with flawless fundamentals. While she's thrilled by the praise, he cuts her celebration short, telling her that she's too narrow-minded. He then reveals that he knows she thought of better methods but chose not to use them, shocking her with his insight. He lectures her that a creator's imagination is their true talent, and by suppressing it, she is only hindering her own growth. His words hit her hard, as she is painfully aware of the mental block that has been holding her back. Taking out the knife, Sehun prepares to give her a practical demonstration, and tells a confused Leah to pay close attention, as he's about to show her something special. He begins to explain his philosophy. Smithing is creating a stone and placing it in water, while enchanting is carving its image onto that water's surface, and concludes the metaphor by stating that enchanting, by its very nature, is like a dream. Then, using his Crimson Flame skill, he imbues the knife with a fiery energy. The application of this new style leaves Leah utterly speechless. He then explains that he's not just enchanting the surface, but embedding reinforcement beneath the surface of the armament itself. He continues his lesson, stating that if one layer isn't enough, you simply need to divide the layers to add more power. To demonstrate, he hurls the knife, which impales the tree. However, the sharpness from the layered enchantment suddenly flows out, creating a razor-thin, powerful current of energy. Sehun confidently remarks that while it wasn't a proper enchantment, a genius like her should be able to understand and build upon the concept. Leah, having witnessed the impossible, realizes the key to overcoming her slump lies within this new method. Overcome with inspiration, a flustered Leah begs him to lend her the enchanted knife. She desperately promises to study it and return it, her genius mind now completely captivated. He agrees and even offers her the materials he used as well, knowing this will secure her growth. Ecstatic, she jumps for joy, thanking him profusely before running off with her new treasures. As she runs off, Sehun successfully establishes a level 1 bond with her. He smirks, commenting on her youthful energy before turning his attention to his next objective. After that, he arrives at the martial arts hall, ready to witness a battle between his future comrade, the Mad Dog, and the demon god of extinguishing lights in their youth. Just as he's settling in, he feels a tug on his sleeve and turns to find Inoue Erika standing beside him. When he asks what she's doing, she bluntly states that she's following him. Then he questions whether she would go if he told her to. She says she will, since she can just watch from a little further away. Turning his attention back to his goal, Sehun examines the 2 new bond materials he has acquired. He now possesses the Erika Inoue Social Link Stone and the top-grade Leah Claudel Complex Bloom, both powerful assets for his future plans. The ranking battle begins, and the crowd roars as the commentator welcomes the freshman to the martial arts hall. The energetic commentator introduces herself as Ron Fong, the youngest professor in the martial arts department. She prepares to introduce the first competitor, building the tension in the arena. A spotlight reveals the champion, the 4th-year valedictorian and next head of the hero-producing Myers family. She is introduced as a flawless superhuman, an active A-class hero, and the hall's reigning rank 1 champion for the last 3 years. The champion is revealed to be the Sword Saint, Arya Myers, who looks upon the crowd with serene confidence. While the crowd, including her brother Jake Myers, cheers for her, Ranfang introduces the challenger. The challenger is Young Song-ha, the spear arts valedictorian and successor of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear. Sehun smiles, finally laying his eyes on the younger version of his future comrade. The announcer calls out the name of the Mad Dogs, Yom Song-ha. The match begins, and Song-ha immediately launches a fiery spear attack against the champion. With a smirk, Arya effortlessly deflects the attack with her rapier. The force of the parry sends a shockwave back at him, and he struggles to defend himself. Song-ha grunts in frustration, already overwhelmed by the sheer difference in their skill. Arya easily counters his fiery assault, her own blade glowing with power. She elegantly dissipates his flame wheel, showcasing her complete control over the battlefield. Despite his efforts, his powerful downward strike is met with ease by the champion. From the sidelines, Sehun critiques the fight, noting that even for his age, Song-ha's skills are below standard. However, he identifies the biggest issue, the flawed armament his future comrade is wielding. Then, in a sudden move, Yom Song-ha throws his spear away and lunges to attack. But before he can attack, his competitor's sword stops near his neck. He stares at the tip of the sword, and calmly admits, I lost. Arya accepts his surrender with a graceful, good work. And with that, the match is declared over, with Arya Myers as the winner. After that, Ranfang announces that the post-match interview will be cancelled, as the challenger has already left the arena. Arya then coyly tells the crowd that fighting the rank 9 challenger right after this would be too tough for her. While she charms the crowd, a furious Yom Song-ha storms out of the arena. Sehun smirks, correctly identifying that the young Mad Dogs is upset. As he begins to leave, Erika asks if he's not going to watch the rest, but he dismisses the idea, saying he isn't a fan of the champion's style. He walks away, bluntly calling her obnoxious. Erika is left confused. She's relieved he wasn't there for her brother, but now she wonders why Sehun seems so angry. Meanwhile, from the arena, Arya Myers notices his departure. A slow smile spreads across her face as she finds the freshman interesting. She then turns her gaze towards him as he exits, and thinks to herself that she might have just found an interesting new person to watch. In a park near the martial arts hall, Lee Se-hoon finds his target, Yong Song-ha, meditating alone after his match. He confirms that his future comrade is alive and well, though he is not yet the hardened warrior he remembers. He recalls the mad dog Yong Song-ha of his past life, a pillar of the death squad who sacrificed himself to defeat a demon god. Se-hoon approaches, hoping to obtain a bondstone more smoothly this time, only to be immediately questioned by a wary Song-ha. Impressed that the stealthy newcomer managed to find him, Song-ha begins to acknowledge his skill. Before he can finish, however, he recognizes the man as Lee Se-hoon, the notorious valedictorian of the Borsippa department. and wonders why our guy is reacting that way, while our guy says, "I was hoping we could talk for a bit." But Seong-ha, unimpressed by the pleasantries, coldly tells him to leave. He follows up with a sharp insult, declaring his hatred for weaklings and setting the stage for his calculated provocation. He continues his verbal assault, belittling Sehun for mistaking petty tricks for real power and telling him to go back home. And he addresses Sehun as nothing more than a blacksmith. Sehun internally notes that, compared to his future Mad Dog's days, this angry outburst is actually quite polite for Seong. Realizing that talking is no longer an option, Sehun prepares for a confrontation, gathering mana in his hand. Seong-ha says, "It seems you have no intention of backing down." At this, our guy replies, "Let me tell you just one thing." He declares that the entire history of the Flamewheel Ember Spears will end because of Seong-ha's weakness. The insult hits its mark, and an enraged Seong-ha lunges at him with a mana-infused punch. In response, Sehun calmly activates his bond imprint, Gluttony Iron, to meet the attack head-on. The Gluttony Iron effortlessly absorbs the mana-infused punch, nullifying the attack completely. Seong-ha is stunned, questioning how the blacksmith could have possibly deflected a punch imbued with his mana. He begrudgingly admits that the Borsippa valedictorian might have had the right to speak to him after all. As the lingering trajectory of his own Ember's mana coalesces in Sehun's hand, Seong-ha realizes the true nature of his opponent's power. With a cry of "It ends here," Sehun unleashes the stolen Ember back at its owner. The fiery blast sends Seong-ha staggering backward, caught completely off guard by his own power. Sehun exhales. The first phase of his provocative plan has been a resounding success. A bewildered Seong-ha demands to know how the Ember, which should only react to his own mana, is now in Sehun's hand. Then, the horrifying realization dawns on him. Sehun didn't just block the attack, he dismantled and stole it. Seething with rage, he glares at the bastard who so thoroughly humiliated him. His aura explodes as he finally loses his temper, preparing to unleash his full power. Sehun reflects that this volatile personality is likely what led to the Flameflower Gate massacre in his original timeline. The two trade furious blows, but Sehun notes that the effects of Gluttony Iron are fading, and his own body is reaching its limit. Concluding that making a bond peacefully is impossible, he decides he has no choice but to smash his future comrade. But just as their fists are about to collide, a powerful force intervenes, stopping them both in their tracks. Jake Myers appears between them, catching both their punches and demanding to know what's going on. Just then, Seong-ha asks Jake if he knows the Borsippa valedictorian, and Jake replies yes. Seong-ha, however, simply glares in silence, his fury still palpable. After getting a curt go from Seong-ha, a relieved Jake happily drags a reluctant Sehun away from the confrontation. As they go, a panicked Jake desperately whispers for Sehun not to say anything weird and to just hurry up and leave. Now alone, Seong-ha reflects on how he nearly lost control and tarnished the reputation of his master's spear technique. He clenches his fist, a bead of sweat running down his face as he processes the humiliating encounter. Meanwhile, as they walk away, Jake chastises Sehun for picking a fight with the senior, warning him that he could have been killed. Sehun just smirks dismissively, telling a shocked Jake that there was no way he would have lost, and reveals he was just threatening him, while a system window pops up, confirming that a bond with his target has been established. He then muses that the Mad Dogs he knew was quite different from the Soft's version he just met, and wonders how it will affect the bond stone. While he is pondering how to raise the bond level, he asks if Jake hurt his hand during the fight. Jake cheerfully dismisses his own scuffed hand, proudly declaring that it's tough and he's fine. Sehun deadpans about Jake's tough hand before being reminded of a more important matter. Jake finally asks the burning question, what on earth did Sehun say about his sister Arya Myers at the arena? When Sehun nonchalantly admits to calling her stuck-up, Jake completely loses it, realizing why his sister had been asking so many questions. Jake then delivers the terrifying news. His sister, the A-class hero Arya Myers, has taken a special interest in Sehun. Sehun, however, coolly welcomes the attention, inwardly calculating that getting on her radar will also get him noticed by his true target, her rival, Yom Shung. When Jake warns that his sister is not to be taken lightly, Sehun shocks him by accurately guessing her personality is petty and insidious. A horrified Jake tries to backtrack, but our protagonist's nonchalant demeanor shows he's already hit the nail on the head. Jake's innocent question about why Sehun dislikes his sister triggers a dark memory of the Sword Saint, Arya Myers. He recalls from his past life that even she, the great Sword Saint, had wielded a sword he considered lackluster. And he remembers the day she vanished, only to reappear wielding a blade forged from the remains of a demon god. This transformation marked her descent into becoming the terrifying demon god of extinguishing light. Back in the present, he concludes with grim certainty that her interest spells nothing but trouble for his plans. Deciding to avoid her at all costs, Sehun abruptly turns and leaves a baffled Jake behind. The confused young man is left wondering what just happened, right before he gets a notification on his phone. It's a text from Arya, and he realizes with dawning horror that she's now pressuring him to be an informant on her interesting new friend. The realization of being caught between his intimidating sister and the enigmatic freshman fills Jake with pure terror. He can just imagine his petty and insidious sister smugly asking for a favor, one he knows he can't refuse. Utterly defeated, he can only let out a sigh of resignation. The next morning, students gather in a lecture hall for their next class. Sehun reflects on his intense confrontation with Yeom Song-ha, while Hans Barmut nervously tries to read the room. Suddenly, a diminutive professor on a personal transporter zips into the room, demanding their attention. The eccentric man introduces himself as Professor Reese Dova, their instructor for attribute refining for the next 2 weeks. The students immediately recognize him as a notoriously eccentric professor as he announces he has something to distribute, and explains that he's handing out the results from their last assignment, which will also serve as their semester budget. After calling out several names, he reaches the last student on his list. When Lee Se-hoon is called, the other students begin to whisper in anticipation, expecting his budget to be massive. However, he's told that his budget hasn't been released yet, leaving him momentarily confused. The professor explains that his assignment was of such high quality that it's being entered into the second-year public auction. Sehun's budget will be determined by the winning bid, which immediately leads him to suspect that Vice Dean Michael is trying to interfere with him again. Still, he trusts that Professor Kim would have intervened if it were a real problem, so Sehun accepts the unusual arrangement. With that settled, Professor Dova announces the day's topic is residual mana and introduces a volunteer assistant. To the class's surprise, the assistant is revealed to be none other than Yeom Song-ha, a third year from the Akar QF Spear Arts Department. While the other students wonder why a senior is here, Sehun dryly notes that Seon-ha seems more interested in this class than his own studies. With introductions over, Professor Dova declares that it's time to cover the basic concepts of residual mana. He begins by explaining the two main forms, starting with the basic charging type. The second is the independent type, which he notes is significantly more difficult to create. He then clarifies that the difficulty lies in the non-standardized method of constructing a mana core, as it varies by creator and material. Because of this, he announces that the students will start with the simpler charging type and calls on his assistant for a demonstration. Yeom Song-ha steps forward and his hand begins to glow with volatile red fire mana. The professor explains that while fire mana is volatile, suppressing its nature allows for excellent retention, making it a perfect example. As if to prove his point, Song-ha perfectly demonstrates his signature technique, the Flame Wheel Ember Spear. Even Hans Barmut is impressed, admitting that he struggles just to control a simple furnace, let alone wield fire mana with such precision. Pleased with the demonstration, Professor Dova decides to leverage his assistant's skills for the day's assignment. The assignment is to create a fire attribute, charging type residual mana armament, all based on the Flame Wheel theme. With that, he dismisses the class to the refining room, reminding them to change into their work attire. The other students immediately see this as a golden opportunity to get close to the popular senior. Hans Barmut is the first to try his luck, eagerly rushing forward to introduce himself. However, Song-ha coldly dismisses him with a blunt "get lost," leaving Hans utterly dejected. After seeing the popular Hans get shot down so brutally, the other hopeful students are crushed and abandon their own attempts. With the crowd dispersed, Song-ha's attention turns to the one person who isn't fawning over him. He calls out to Lee Se-hoon, who has already started walking towards the refining room. Intrigued by the freshman's provocations from their last encounter, he confronts him, demanding to know just what he knows. Se-hoon begins his explanation, stating that proficiency with the Flame Wheel Ember Spear is determined by the number of wheels, and that the current A-rank hero sect leader is capable of 8. He then points out that Song-ha's effortless demonstration suggests he has the potential to maintain at least 6 wheels simultaneously. Unimpressed, Song-ha cuts him off, asking what the point of this basic analysis is. Se-hoon cuts to the chase, stunning the senior by revealing that he knows about his secret attempt to reach the 7th wheel. He then correctly deduces that Song-ha reached that peak only to lose the ability, a secret so closely guarded that not even his own sect leader is aware of it. Se-hoon cryptically explains that he simply has a knack for handling fire and noticed something was off with the senior's flames. He diagnoses the problem with pinpoint accuracy, Sung-ha isn't properly detonating the technique's residual power, instead letting it dissipate uselessly. His words hit a nerve, and a now humbled Sung-ha asks if the freshman knows the cause of this flaw. Sehun cheekily replies that he has a guess, but feels no obligation to share it, much to Sung-ha's immense frustration. Seeing no other choice, Sung-ha swallows his pride and asks the freshman to state his demands. Sehun lays out two conditions. First, fair payment for his help, and second, an agreement that Sung-ha will consult him before making any major decisions in the future. He then gives the senior an ultimatum, telling him to have an answer by the time they reach the refining room. With his pride and future on the line, a desperate Sung-ha agrees to the terms. However, he adds one last condition. He'll only agree if Sehun can actually prove his claims, a challenge our protagonist accepts with a confident smirk. The scene then shifts to the bustling smithing workshop where the demonstration will take place. Onlookers murmur in confusion as he begins crafting without a blueprint, questioning his methods. Our protagonist begins his work, combining fire and dark attribute ores in a precise 7003 ratio. A nearby student watches in disbelief, wondering why the department valedictorian would use such a reckless method that should cause the attribute mana to dissipate. With intense focus, Sehun applies heat just until the attribute mana begins to leak out, a crucial first step in his unique technique. He then carefully adjusts his hand wraps, preparing for the delicate process ahead. Meanwhile, Professor Reese Dova recognizes the advanced thermal substitution technique, realizing why Professor Kim must have approved the auction submission. But Sehun knows that while his technique looks like ordinary thermal substitution to others, Yeom Sung-ha will see its true, profound nature. He turns to a focused Sung-ha, commanding him to watch closely. Sehun then demonstrates how to balance the opposing forces, placing the outward-spreading fire mana inside and the inward-digging dark mana outside to form a perfect circle. Professor Dova and Sung-ha watch in stunned silence as the Sung-ha wonders if that is all there is to the seemingly simple technique. But suddenly, he has a revelation. He realizes this method could utilize his second mana attribute, Dark, which he has been forced to suppress. And he recalls how suppressing his Dark attribute caused his signature, Flame Wheel skill, to degrade all the way to the fifth wheel. As if on cue, he effortlessly manifests 5 black flame wheels, while our guy explains that they are far stronger than Sung-ha's 7 regular ones. Sung-ha then explains his dire situation. The Flame Flower Gate sends instructors to check on the skills of its successors. Falling below the 6th wheel means being stripped of his position, a fate he is set to face tomorrow. He even laments that he can't just revert to his old technique, as his now unstable dark mana has become uncontrollable. The chaotic mix of fire and dark attribute mana swirls within him, a problem entirely of his own making. Anxious and cornered, our guy asks when the instructor is coming, despairing when Sung-ha confirms it's tomorrow. Contemplating the possibility of expulsion, Sehun wonders if there's any method that can possibly be mastered in just one day. Just then, our guy grabs Yeom Sung-ha by the collar. And with a fierce resolve in his eyes, our guy asks if he can do anything if his position as successor is protected, to which Sung-ha replies, "Yes, I can." "Good," Sehun says. Their shared determination forges a bond, allowing him to extract a high-grade red resonant black stone. With a confident grin and the newly acquired ore in hand, our protagonist declares, "First, we change your weapon." Sung-ha proudly leads him to Akar QF's exclusive private training room, prompting a sarcastic show-off from the young blacksmith. Inside, Sehun accesses the room's control panel intending to change the skin or virtual environment for their training. The training room instantly transforms into a replica of the Flame Flower Gate, Sung-ha's home. When Sehun teases him for being homesick, Sung-ha explains that it's a skin his master sent him. Holding the red resonant black stone, Sehun smirks, ready to begin crafting the training tools they'll need. He begins to work his magic on the extracted ore, preparing it for its new purpose. A system window identifies the new material, a high-grade red resonant black stone, an ore where fire and dark mana coexist to resonate with internal mana. With a swift motion, Sehun affixes the newly crafted gem to a spear and announces, "Done." Sung-ha is bewildered as Sehun hands him a second spear, questioning how he's supposed to manage 2 when he already struggles with 1. Sehun simply instructs him to create a flame wheel with his left hand while simultaneously releasing dark attribute mana with his right. Sung-ha closes his eyes and concentrates, attempting to follow the seemingly impossible instructions. He channels his power, creating a flame wheel with one spear while gathering dark energy in the other. But the attempt backfires as the conflicting energies clash violently, shocking him. At this, Sehun calmly explains that the explosion happened because he unconsciously let his dark attribute mana flow into his left hand as well. and elaborates that Song-ha's years of suppressing his dark mana have made its natural mixing process messy and self-defeating. Sehun then places his ink spider bracelet on him, saying that reaching the sixth wheel will be quick once he masters handling both mana types. Song-ha can only wryly acknowledge that his new partner has some impressive items. 3 hours later, Song-ha is training furiously with the dual spears, his movements slowly becoming more fluid. Sehun notes his rapid adaptation and decides it's time to observe the past you to see how great he truly was. Our protagonist begins his data collection, meticulously analyzing Song-ha's breathing patterns and muscle movements. The analysis goes even deeper, observing the shift in gravity and the exact wavelength of mana circulating through his body. Suddenly, Song-ha stops, sensing that he's being watched with an unusual intensity. When confronted, Sehun innocently claims he's just performing data collection, and clarifies that he needs this data to craft the perfect weapon for him, leaving the Spearmaster slightly flustered. Sehun then casually mentions he's only making the weapon as a school assignment and tells him not to get his hopes up, which only irritates the Spearmaster more. Changing the subject, Sehun gets to the heart of the matter. He asks if there's an absolute reason why Song-ha must maintain his successor position, striking a nerve. After a moment of silence, Song-ha admits that his master wants him to become the next sect leader, and states that as a disciple he simply follows the will of his master, the S-class hero who adopted him. A portrait reveals his master and adoptive father, Yeom Jin-hyun, the first leader of the Flame Flower Gate. Sehun recalls that although Jin-hyun retired due to injury, he still holds absolute influence over Song-ha as both a master and a father. Understanding this deep bond, Sehun watches as their bond level reaches 3. Just then, Song-ha looks at him with suspicion and asks the crucial question, "Why are you helping me?" Sehun's expression turns serious as he thinks of his ultimate goal, the 6 great demon realms. He visualizes the desolate landscape swallowed by the swamp of pandemonium, now teeming with demonic beasts. He then declares his intention to enter all those demon realms, and to do so, he needs people to protect him and weapons to arm them. After that, he bluntly points out that as the next sect leader, Song-ha's skills and financial situation should be decent, prompting a dry, how materialistic retort. Of course, he retorts, questioning why he would do volunteer work for someone he barely knows. Song-ha understands, asking if this means he must pay a price for the help he is about to receive. And so, Song-ha makes his offer, "Help me become the sect leader of the Flame Flower Gate, and then I will follow you into those 6 great demon realms." The scene poignantly mirrors a memory from the future, one where Song-ha begs Sehun to make him a weapon to kill the demon gods. The deal is struck. Sehun says he won't regret this decision, and with a menacing grin he vows, "Now, even if you hate it, I will make you the sect leader." The bond imprint for the red resonant black stone activates, signaling the true beginning of their partnership. Later, at the Flavium Training Hall, Sehun and Song-ha arrive for their sparring session. They are greeted by the arrogant 7th wheel instructor of the Flame Flower Gate, Gang Hyun-un, who explains that the sect leader sent other disciples to observe a sparring match between him and the young master, Song-ha. He then condescendingly refers to Song-ha as the most outstanding person after the next sect leader, a subtle jab at his position. However, Song-ha sharply corrects the instructor, reminding him that the next sect leader hasn't been chosen yet. Instead of a simple skill assessment, he boldly rejects the plan and officially requests a 7th wheel promotion trial. The instructor is taken aback, internally scoffing at the fools who dares to covet the sect leader's seat. A flashback reveals that the current successor candidate had ordered Hyun-un to deal decisively with Song-ha if he challenged the 7th wheel. Hyun-un tries to dissuade him, patronizingly saying it's too early, but Song-ha bluntly tells him he talks too much. Provoked by Song-ha's taunt about being afraid for his position, a furious Hyun-un demands his spear, and declares that the 7th wheel promotion will be decided by a domain sparring match. He explains that it's a simple contest of strength, where a victory or even a draw will result in Song-ha's promotion. As the match begins, Song-ha readies the dual short spears Sehun crafted for him. Instructor Hyun-un scoffs at the crude dual short spears just as Song-ha unleashes his flame wheel. He moves with surprising speed, his dual spears now wreathed in chaotic red and black flames. Just then, Hyun-un chastises him for his messy flames, reminding Song-ha that the sect leader had ordered him to suppress his dark attribute mana. Confident in Sehun's training, Song-ha retorts that they'll see whose flames are superior once they clash. Vowing that his opponent will regret this, the instructor launches his own pure flame wheel attack. The 2 powerful flame techniques collide in the center of the training ground. Almost immediately, Song-ha's dark-tinged flames begin to overwhelm Hyun-un's pure fire. The instructor watches in disbelief as a monstrous, shadowy beast forms from his opponent's combined mana. He panics, realizing his flame wheel isn't just being overpowered, it's being devoured and ripped apart. The sheer force of Seongha's attack then shatters the instructor's spear. Defeated and disarmed, instructor Gang Hyun-un drops to his knees in the middle of the training hall. Seongha stands victorious, sarcastically asking his defeated opponent if his weapons are still crude. After the match, Se-hoon asks what happens next, and Seongha explains that following the promotion ceremony, he will be recognized as an instructor and the official successor. Se-hoon presses further, asking what it takes to become the official sect leader. Seongha reveals the two conditions, reaching the 8th wheel and obtaining the consent of the majority of the instructors. While our guy examines the broken dual spears, he asks, "If you reach the 8th wheel, can you get their consent?" Seongha confidently states that he can obtain the instructor's consent through sparring, though it won't be as easy as today's match. Se-hoon dismisses the difficulty, however, stating that it won't take long based on the ease of today's victory. Having proven his worth, Se-hoon tells a smirking Seongha to start worrying about how he'll pay the price for this help. Seongha readily agrees, offering to provide whatever cash or materials he requires, and surprises him by immediately placing another commission. Holding the training spears, Seongha reflects that while they weren't bad, they were merely a borrowed assignment for one of Se-hoon's classes. He then wonders with anticipation what kind of masterpiece Se-hoon will forge for him next, considering he made these training spears in just a few hours. So he bluntly commissions a more usable weapon, a comment that stings Se-hoon but also increases their bond level to 2. A system window updates their relationship status to transaction, where their bond strengthens through completed deals. The scene then shifts to a packed auction house, buzzing with anticipation. An auctioneer takes the stage, officially beginning the refining department's second-year regular auction. Se-hoon, dressed smartly on Professor Kim's advice, observes the unusually large crowd alongside Inoue Erika, realizing the power his title as valedictorian holds, and notes that Vice Dean Michael Barmut's scheme to take over the department will be harder to execute now that our guy is in the spotlight. On stage, the presenter explains that 36 iron swords will be auctioned, each subjected to a special quality verification process. He then unveils the Seo Jiumbo, a cloth woven from the fur of an S-class white tiger, renowned for its softness and resistance to slashing. To demonstrate, a verifier strikes the cloth with a standard sword. The sword shatters upon impact, failing to even leave a scratch on the Seo Jiumbo. The presenter announces that this test will be used to weed out swords that sacrifice durability for raw cutting power. The auction begins with the first item, Cadet Joseph's blue horn sword. Se-hoon remarks that the auction organizers have prepared properly, and Erika asks if he knows the real reason for this unusual test. He explains the complex nature of the white tiger, noting that its different body parts have unique properties. He then reveals the fur's secret: it mimics the sharpness of any weapon it touches, actively eating away at its durability. Erika quickly realizes the problem, asking if his white light longsword is at a disadvantage, since high cutting power usually means low durability. Se-hoon confirms it's a blatant setup targeting him, one that would also tarnish the supervising Professor Kim's reputation if the sword were to break. But with a confident smirk, he declares that their plan will only work if he hadn't made the sword properly. After several other swords are sold, the auctioneer finally announces the last item. It's time for the quality verification of the white light longsword, forged by the department valedictorian Lee Se-hoon. The verifier brings the glowing sword down upon the Seo Jiumbo cloth. To everyone's surprise, the verifier gasps as the sword passes through the supposedly indestructible cloth with ease. From the shadows, Vice Dean Michael Barmut watches in stunned disbelief. The white light longsword rests on the other side of the perfectly sliced cloth, completely unharmed and still glowing with power, leaving the Vice Dean to wonder what just happened. Suddenly, a figure rises from the audience, shocking everyone. It's Lee Se-hoon, who calmly asks to explain the situation as he walks onto the stage. He explains that a normal sword with a sharpness aura would indeed break against the Seo Jiumbo cloth. However, he reveals his white light longsword is different. It gathers atmospheric mana and condenses it into an ultra-thin, powerful edge, and clarifies that the mana is so subtle it's barely perceptible, which is why no one else could feel it. After that, he defines the phenomenon not as sword ki, but as sharpness aura, an energy too sharp to be just light, yet not dense enough to be true ki. Inoue Erika, in the audience, then asks if the previous demonstration was also due to this sharpness aura. Exactly, he confirms, explaining that when identical auras clash, they resonate rather than cancel each other out. He then reveals his trump card, the social link stones he extracted from his bond with Inoue Erika. Activating her bond imprint, he channels the stone's power into the sword. The stone's tuned mana immediately begins to regulate and stabilize the sword's own fluctuating energy. With the mana stabilized, he declares all that's left is to add a clear path as he prepares to enhance the weapon. In a stunning display, he channels energy through the blade, upgrading it right there on the auction stage. A system notification then announces that the White Light Longsword's rank has risen to rare. It now gleams with a new power, its status confirmed as a low-quality rare-grade weapon with the skill Sharpness Aura Reinforcement added. Sehun nonchalantly explains that he simply added a skill to strengthen the aura and raised the sword's rank from high-grade to rare. He then coolly tells the flabbergasted auctioneer to reflect this upgrade in the starting price. The auctioneer announces the new starting price of 5 million won for the upgraded, rare-rank sword, catching the attention of Jake Myers and Inoue Erika. An academic in the crowd realizes the sword is now invaluable as new research material. An academic in the crowd realizes the sword is now invaluable as new research material. The announcement sparks a frantic bidding war, and the price soars from 10 million to 100 million in seconds. A shocked Jake Myers throws out a bid of 200 million won. But Inoue Erika calmly counters with a bid of 210 million, unfazed by the rapidly climbing price. The auctioneer hypes up the crowd, trying to drive the price even higher for the unique weapon. While Jake and Erika go back and forth, Sehun watches the ultra-rich throw money around and glances at his own meager bank balance. Suddenly, a new voice from the back of the room silences the crowd with an astronomical bid, 600 million. Jake sweats, recalling his sister Arya's strict order to buy Sehun's armament no matter the cost. The new bidder, revealed to be Dean Ryu Unha, wonders if she bid too low, realizing she's a whale who has just entered a shrimp fight. Defeated, Jake slumps in his seat, dreading his sister's wrath for failing his mission. The auction concludes with the White Light Longsword sold for a staggering 600 million won, leaving Michael Barmut and Professor Kim In-kyeol in disbelief. Sehun, however, is simply impressed by the outcome. Later, he checks his phone, confirming that the 600 million won has been deposited into his account. He confirms the payment with Dean Ryu, who now owns the sword. He then asks about her plans for the sword, and she replies that she intends to test it in a danger zone. And she smirks, telling him it's a waste to use such a fine item for mere training. He even proposes a joint trip to Unwell Mountain, the site for the upcoming first-year practice, so he can see the sword in action. The dean expresses slight hesitation, admitting it's a bit much even for someone in her position. To sweeten the deal, however, he excitedly offers to make her any armament she wants as a return gift, and she eagerly tries to schedule their trip. Sehun agrees, but inwardly admits that going to the practice site is just an excuse for his true goal. He recalls the legendary Jürgen Kruger, the world's strongest necromancer and chairman of the UD group. He knows that one of Kruger's lost artifacts is hidden in Unwell Mountain, and that is his true objective. Meanwhile, in her office, Jake stands defeated before his sister Arya. She smiles menacingly, confirming that her brother failed to acquire the sword. He apologizes profusely, but she dismisses it, already thinking about her next move, and reminds Jake that he is in the same body control class as Sehun and tells him to use that opportunity to approach him. Arya dangles the prospect of discussing his succession ceremony with their father should he resolve this matter well, and warns him that at this rate, Sehun will soon push him out of the valedictorian spot. Jake stands in silence, knowing his sister's words hold a grim truth. Understood, he says, accepting his sister's command despite their father's orders. He steels his resolve, vowing to get that sword from Lee Sehun whatever it takes. But Arya coldly reprimands him for interrupting her, putting him back in his place. Bring it to me, she commands with a chilling smile. By any means necessary, she adds, her focus locked on the name Lee Sehun. She then recalls the day when our guy calls her obnoxious, and states that now he gets on my nerves. For his class assignment, Sehun presents a pair of finished dual spears to an impressed Professor Reese Dova. A system window displays the stats for the newly forged weapons, the high-quality Crimson 1 spear and Black 10 spear, designed for flame and dark attributes respectively. Professor Dova marvels at the spear's intricate design, noting that they even have an auxiliary formula to repel attribute mana if the user's operation is slightly off. The eccentric professor declares that at this level of craftsmanship, the spears can be considered both a training tool and a textbook. Thoroughly impressed, the professor awards him a perfect score and even exempts him from attendance for the rest of the course. The other students can only look on in envy, grumbling about their rotten luck to be in the same class as a genius who might as well graduate immediately. As Sehun bows respectfully, the professor tells him to take the spears, adding that he should let him know if he ever wants to sell them. Carrying his new dual spears, Sehun heads across campus for his next class with Professor Ma Guangsu. Upon arriving at the training hall, he runs into Jake Myers, who asks, "What, do you have a class now too?" At this, our guy replies that he just came early to get some practice. Thinking he's in the way, our guy offers to leave, but Jake stops him. Visibly nervous, Jake awkwardly asks if he can do him a favor. However, before he can even state his request, Sehun flatly refuses, leaving the combat prodigy dumbfounded. He correctly deduces that Jake's sister, Arya, sent him to procure a weapon and bluntly reiterates that he has no intention of making one for her. Sehun knows he must avoid the future demon god, Arya, realizing that any weapon he'd make with his current skills would only disappoint her. Undeterred, Jake grabs his bag and proposes another way to settle things. He then presents a hero-grade Hammer of Bly Flames, a powerful weapon coated with both fire and dark attribute mana. Sehun examines the hammer, acknowledging that it's a decent item but with plenty of room for improvement. Jake challenges him to a rematch, wagering the valuable hammer against his services to forge a weapon for his sister. Sehun agrees to the spar but shrewdly decides to add one more condition to the wager, and demands that if he wins, Jake and his sister must leave him completely alone for 1 month. With the terms set, Jake reluctantly agrees, and the two rivals face off for their second duel. Determined not to lose again, Jake vows to go all out from the very beginning and begins charging his mana. Sehun is impressed, noting that the sheer amount of mana Jake compresses just by clenching his fist is proof of his incredible power. To even the odds, Sehun activates one of his bond imprint materials. He deactivates Inoue Erika's social link stone and activates Dean Ryu Unha's powerful gluttony iron. A system window explains that the social link stone he just deactivated had been adjusting his body's mana to its optimal state. With that, Sehun reveals his new weapons, expertly spinning the dual spears into a ready stance. Jake is surprised to see how accustomed he is to handling short spears, a weapon he has never seen him use before. He wonders if such proficiency with multiple weapons is a common trait among blacksmiths. Underestimating his opponent, Jake charges forward, confident that mere familiarity with a weapon won't be enough to secure a victory. Just then, he launches a powerful punch, but Sehun effortlessly parries the blow with his dual-wielded spears. Focused and determined, Jake presses his attack, unwilling to accept another defeat. With a confident grin, he declares that this time, the victory will be his. Sehun, however, sidesteps a charged punch and lands a surprising counterattack with the blunt end of his new hammer. Jake is caught completely off guard by the unexpected choice of weapon and combat style. To Jake's absolute astonishment, Sehun flawlessly mimics the Flame Wheel Ember Spear, the signature technique of Yom Song-ha. Our protagonist reminisces about his past life, where he had to learn his comrades' skills just to raise his bond level with them. Once his companions, like Song-ha, truly opened up, they shared their most secret and powerful techniques, which he has now inherited. He grimaces, recalling the harsh insults and criticism he endured from Song-ha while learning his spear arts. And while he can only manage a crude imitation for now, Sehun is confident it's enough to win this duel. Just then, he unleashes a fluid and fiery assault, immediately forcing Jake onto the defensive with the copied spear technique. Jake realizes with frustration that he has lost the flow of the fight and is being completely outmaneuvered by this unpredictable style. However, he correctly deduces that his opponent's enhanced physical abilities are temporary and reliant on a skill. Believing he can win by outlasting him, he decides to stall for time until the skill wears off. He attempts to retreat and create distance, but Sehun sees right through his plan. Sehun smirks, mentally complimenting the top student's sharp instincts even when cornered, but refuses to let him escape. To close the distance, he unleashes the explosive ring skill from his Ink Spider bracelet, and he muses on the irony of using Yong Song-ha's own mana, which he had stored in the bracelet, to fuel this very attack. Jake panics, utterly confused as he senses dark attribute mana coming from the man he believed was a fire user. Forced to defend against the unexpected dark mana assault, he desperately gathers his own power. He unleashes his family's ultimate technique, the Myers-style Formless Sword. He condenses his mana into a devastating attack known as the Blue Axis Light Thread. A powerful beam of pure mana shoots across the room, aimed directly at Sehun. Unfazed, our protagonist coolly assesses the bare-handed sword art, acknowledging its power. Deciding he can't afford to lose, he prepares his own final move, a revised version of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear, and combines the spear art with a secondary technique, Eclipse Crescent, to create a devastating crisscrossing slash. The two powerful attacks collide in a spectacular explosion of fire, darkness, and light. Sehun's combined attack proves superior, cutting right through Jake's formless sword. Jake watches in disbelief as his opponent's attack overwhelms his own, leaving him wide open. With his opponent's spears at his neck and his own mana depleted, he quietly concedes. With his victory secured, Se-hoon not only gets his month of peace, but also unexpectedly establishes a new bond with Jake Myers. Se-hoon questions Jake, asking if their duel truly ended in a tie. Jake humbly admits that considering he used a near-fatal skill, it was essentially his loss. Frustrated, he laments that the outcome would have been different if only he could properly wield a sword. Se-hoon asks why he can't, and Jake explains that for some unknown reason, any sword he holds breaks far too easily. He recounts that he has even shattered a hero-grade sword before, leaving Se-hoon to ponder the strange phenomenon. After a moment of realization, Se-hoon seems to understand the situation and instructs Jake to hold out his right hand. A confused Jake complies, while Se-hoon warns him to relax his hand and keep his mana still to avoid getting hurt. Then, to Jake's alarm, Se-hoon suddenly brings his hammer down toward his outstretched hand. He stops just short, having already diagnosed the issue. Jake's mana has the property of alteration rather than reinforcement. A startled Jake demands an explanation for the scare, and Se-hoon simply offers a quick apology. He then cuts to the chase, offering to make Jake a sword that he won't be able to break. This unexpected offer establishes a bond with Jake Myers, allowing Se-hoon to extract a key material. Se-hoon confidently promises to forge an unbreakable sword using the newly acquired Jake Myers compression stone. As they talk, our protagonist's sharp senses suddenly pick up an approaching presence. Just as Professor Ma Guangsu appears in the doorway, a notification confirms that a new bond has been established with him. Se-hoon realizes that the professor must have witnessed his entire duel with Jake. Professor Ma calls Se-hoon over for a private chat, dismissing Jake from the room. The professor confronts him, questioning how he can be a blacksmith one moment and a skilled spearman and swordsman the next. He sternly demands to know who Se-hoon really is, warning him to answer carefully. With a disarmingly cheerful expression, Se-hoon rephrases the question, asking if the professor finds his perfect stance suspicious. He explains that his ability is just a cheap trick, demonstrating by creating a complex metal sculpture from mere scraps, and reveals his skill allows him to mimic another person's body by adjusting his muscles, but clarifies that the process severely strains his body, leaving Professor Ma momentarily stunned. As Se-hoon demonstrates, the effect dissipates once the skill ends. The professor asks about the skill's limits, and Se-hoon explains that it requires observation time and puts immense physical strain on his body. The words observation and mimicry trigger a dark and painful memory for Professor Ma. Apologizing for his suspicion, he explains that he overreacted because a particularly nasty demon possesses a similar ability. Se-hoon immediately realizes the professor is thinking of the doppelganger, one of the 10 evils of the pandemonium. A flashback reveals the doppelganger, a vicious demon who mimics and kills heroes, thereby cutting off their legacies. It's revealed that Professor Ma holds a particularly deep grudge against the doppelganger from a past defeat. Se-hoon now understands that this shared connection to the doppelganger is what caused their bond to form. The professor eyes him, likely thinking that Se-hoon is either the doppelganger himself or could be useful in fighting the demon. However, Se-hoon calmly accepts the suspicion, understanding the professor's caution when it comes to demons. To the professor's surprise, our protagonist agrees he would have done the same, earning a relieved laugh from the older man. Professor Ma then launches into a tirade about how modern heroes lack awareness of demons, much to Se-hoon's quiet annoyance. He then announces that Se-hoon's unique skill will force him to completely overhaul his teaching methods. As he leaves, he muses that with Se-hoon's talent, he could have been valedictorian at the combat department, despite his humble background. He walks away, intrigued by the enigmatic freshman, whom he now considers a fun new puzzle to explore. Se-hoon then receives a call from Yom Song-ha, who impatiently asks what he wants in return for his help, and insists that he feels uneasy without paying his debts, prompting Se-hoon to comment on how exhausting he must be to deal with. Se-hoon uses the opportunity to ask if he knows a Babel mage named Louise Valent. After Song-ha says he's never heard of her, Se-hoon tasks him with secretly finding out her whereabouts and what she's currently doing. Song-ha takes offense when Se-hoon questions whether he has the connections for such a task. Se-hoon then bluntly reminds him of his current broke and powerless status within the Flameflower Gate. Song-ha assures him that he has other channels and to just wait, leaving Se-hoon to muse on Louise's situation. He recalls that Louise Valent, the explosive dog, wasn't well known in his past life but was a ticking time bomb, and reflects that her abrasive personality only developed after a certain injury, meaning he might still be able to intervene in time. To his surprise, Seong-ha calls back almost immediately, having already found her. He reports that Louise Valent is the second-year salutatorian of the Elemental Department and was a very promising cadet. He continues, explaining that half a year ago her wand exploded during a spar which permanently damaged her mana circuit, and concludes that Louise is undergoing rehabilitation at UR's General Hospital with no signs of improvement, and promises to send over the file. Just as Sehun hangs up the call, Jake Myers reappears, happy to have caught him. He eagerly runs up, wanting to finalize the details about the sword Sehun had promised. Sehun shows Jake the report on Louise, which states the accident involves Gertz Kruger and Pierre Barmut, the two who created the faulty wand. Jake recognizes the names, revealing that the Kruger and Barmut families are not only in-laws but also members of the prestigious Noblesse network. Sehun quickly strikes a deal. If Jake investigates them, he will forge the sword in just 1 week. An ecstatic Jake readily agrees, declaring he'll do anything if Sehun can really craft the sword. Seizing the moment, Sehun makes his first shocking request: break my arm. As Jake stares in disbelief, Sehun calmly adds that he needs it done as cleanly as possible. Meanwhile, the story shifts to Ur's General Hospital, Ascus, where one of his future comrades is in a desperate situation. There, a team of doctors, including the professor in charge, watches with bated breath as a rehabilitation experiment begins. In a hospital gown, a young woman named Louise Valent takes a shaky breath, preparing for another grueling attempt to use her powers. With determination, she announces that she will begin her 59th rehabilitation attempt. She then attempts to channel her power, trying to unleash her signature lava bullet skill. However, the attack immediately implodes within her, causing a violent internal backlash. Racked with pain, she clutches her mouth as a mana backflow phenomenon courses through her system. The physical pain triggers the trauma of her initial injury, causing her mana to freeze and the experiment to fail once more. Seeing this, the supervising professor immediately halts the experiment, ordering the staff to administer mana neutralizers and tranquilizers. Refusing to give up, a weakened Louise insists she's okay and just needs a short break before they can resume. But the professor flatly denies her request, informing her they are done for the day and that her future experiments will be limited. Adding insult to injury, he declares that her rehabilitation will be downgraded to using only beginner-level magic. Louise is utterly stunned, unable to comprehend the humiliation of being reduced to the beginner level. In a moment of pure desperation, she lunges at the professor, pleading for just one more chance to prove herself. As the medical staff attempts to restrain her, she screams that she can still do it, refusing to be sedated. She even throws off the restraining orderlies, her voice cracking as she insists she is fine. Yet despite her defiant screams, her body is reaching its absolute limit. The strain proves to be too much, and she collapses from exhaustion and internal damage. Her last conscious thought before passing out is a simple, frustrated, "Damn it." Later, lying defeated in her bed, Louise glares at the ceiling, overwhelmed with bitterness and frustration. Alone with her thoughts, she can only curse her own powerlessness. She berates herself for losing her composure and blowing her chance, feeling utterly trapped by her condition. Refusing to wallow in self-pity, she gets out of bed, determined to find another way to train if the official rehab won't work. Just as she exits her room, she collides headfirst with another patient in the hallway. Clutching her nose in pain, she angrily wonders which careless bastard just ran into her. She looks up to find Lee Se-hoon, who glares back and provokes her with a cold, "What are you looking at?" Se-hoon immediately flashes back to a chaotic air raid, a past encounter that explains his hostility. He remembers coughing through the dust and smoke, having barely survived the incident. In his memory, he reflects on how he almost died during that terror attack. Fleeing the scene, he had vowed to never again get involved with those bastards. He then recalls seeing the mass perpetrator, whom he recognizes as a younger, more powerful Louise Valent. However, she identified him as the mastermind behind the attack, an A-class powerhouse. The memory shows the moment their paths first crossed, an antagonistic encounter from the very start. And she asks, "What are you looking at?" Snapping back to the present, a furious Louise throws his own words back at him. With her temper flaring, she demands an apology for him bumping into her. But in the middle of her tirade, she suddenly grows faint and collapses from the exertion. Surprisingly, Se-hoon catches her, chiding her for wandering around when she is clearly sick, and offers to help her back to her room or call a nurse, but she stubbornly refuses any assistance. Swallowing her pride, Louise reluctantly lets him help her, fuming at her own physical weakness. After guiding her back to her room, he asks if she needs anything before he goes. She weakly asks him to get a black case from the top drawer of her nightstand. Se-hoon retrieves the box and hands it to a still wary Louise. Though she tells him to stop being nosy, he insists on staying until he sees her use whatever is in the box. She takes a deep breath from an inhaler, and a strange, sickly green energy briefly surrounds her. Se-hoon's eyes narrow with terrifying insight as he asks why she is actively harming herself. Ignoring her confused denial, he stands over her and bluntly calls out her supposed medicine. Then, he drops a bombshell, revealing that the inhaler she has been using is actually a poison designed to make her condition worse. Louise stares at the inhaler in her hand, her world tilting as she struggles to comprehend his devastating accusation. Her shock quickly turns to anger as she menacingly asks him to repeat himself. He confirms that she heard him correctly, standing firm in his accusation. However, their tense confrontation is interrupted by a hospital-wide announcement paging Cadet Lee Se-hoon to the nursing station. As he prepares to leave, Louise confirms his identity from her hospital bed. Before departing, he gives her a final warning that she'll become magically disabled if she keeps using the inhaler, only to be met with a cold, "Get lost." Furious, she declares that she has nothing to say to lowly blacksmiths and orders him to get out. He calmly exits the room, leaving her to stew in her anger. Alone in her room, she curses the lowly blacksmiths who have just upended her world. Despite the hostile encounter, Se-hoon is surprised to see a system notification confirming that a bond has now been established with Louise Valent. Later, at the doctor's office, Se-hoon is told his cleanly broken bone should heal within a week. The doctor assures him there's no damage to his muscles or mana circuits, prompting him to ask if he can be discharged immediately. When the doctor suggests another week of rest, he realizes this is his chance and confirms that he can stay in the hospital for up to 2 weeks. He plans to use this extended hospital stay to get closer to Louise and begin treating her damaged mana circuits. His primary objective, however, is to take care of the mana eroder, the poisoned inhaler that is the root of her problems. To sow the seeds of doubt, he casually asks the doctor if he knows a cadet named Louise Valent. Our guy feigns concern, snitching that he saw her have a seizure while trying to use magic. He then lies that she asked him not to tell, framing his meddling as genuine worry for her safety, which successfully catches the doctor's attention. As he leaves, the doctor's thoughtful expression confirms that his plan to disrupt Louise's current treatment is working perfectly. The next morning, Se-hoon sets the next phase of his plan into motion. He calls his new ally, Jake Myers, to cash in a favor. Wasting no time, he asks Jake for the information he'd requested earlier. On the phone, Jake begins to report his findings, starting with Babel's influential Ivory Tower Sponsorship Foundation, and explains that the Ivory Tower, operated independently by magic professors and alumni, holds absolute influence over magic cadets at Babel. Jake continues, explaining that Louise had been a strong candidate for their scholarship, competing against a senior named Gotts Kruger. When Se-hoon confirms the name, Jake clarifies that she was the other strong candidate alongside Gotts. He then recounts how the weapon provided to Louise by the Barmut family exploded right before the scholarship match, resulting in Gotts being selected instead. The investigation revealed a cooperative relationship between the Barmut family and Gotts' family, the Krugers. These circumstances make it almost certain that Gotts Kruger and Pierre Barmut conspired to take her out of the running. Se-hoon now has confirmation of the culprits, but he still needs to understand the role of the poisoned inhaler in the conspiracy. So, he asked Jake if he found anything else that seemed out of place. Jake mentions that a Professor Charles from the Elemental Department went out of his way to help Louise after her serious injury and continues to sponsor her to this day. Though Jake presents it as a heartwarming story, Se-hoon's intuition tells him something is deeply wrong, and he moves to end the call. But Jake quickly stops him, asking for a favor in return and mentioning that people like Yeom Sung-ha and Erica are worried about him, and complains that he's the one getting death glares from Se-hoon's powerful friends and begs him to let them know he's okay. Se-hoon dismissively agrees before hanging up, scoffing at a text from Yeom Sung-ha that demands he not die. While walking down the hall, he absentmindedly realizes he doesn't even have Erica's phone number. Dismissing Jake's worries, he decides to contact them later and knocks on the door to room 2002. He announces himself as the person who helped her yesterday, but is cut off as the door flies open. She grabs him and takes him inside the room. Seething with rage, she confronts the man she believes has just ruined everything for her. Her rage is so great that she shatters the window of her hospital room with a furious shout. She then explodes at a bewildered Se-hoon, demanding to know if he has any idea what happened to her because of his meddling. Because he snitched, her doctor has ordered 2 weeks of absolute rest and reset her rehabilitation intensity back to level 1. All her hard work over the past 6 months is now completely wasted. Se-hoon ignores her rage and simply asks if she used the inhaler, to which she retorts that of course she didn't after his warning. Satisfied, he calmly declares that he will fix her mana burns, leaving Louise momentarily stunned. She scoffs and asks, "Do you even know what mana burns are?" At this, our guy points out that mana burns are considered an incurable disease that even summit climbers can't fix, at least for now. Intrigued despite herself, she condescendingly agrees to hear what kind of nonsense he has to say. Se-hoon begins his explanation by picking up the inhaler from her bedside table. He first asks who gave her the inhaler, and she admits it was a professor she knows. He then reveals the item's true nature, dubbing it the Mana Eroder. To prove his point, he activates his Divine Spirit Link Magic CSSC skill, ready to give her a live demonstration. He proceeds to use the inhaler on himself, explaining that the Mana Eroder alters the voltage of the user's mana circuits, and demonstrates how the eroder changes only the circuit in the neck area, causing a painful mismatch with the rest of the body. This conflict, he explains, creates an overload that makes it impossible to use mana at all, a phenomenon she knows all too well. The words, "impossible to use mana," strike a chord, and she clutches her neck, finally realizing the truth behind her own debilitating symptoms. A flashback reveals Professor Charles giving her the inhaler, claiming it would be very effective for her wound. She recalls the moment she accepted the poison from her trusted mentor. The professor had encouraged her, promising she would overcome her mana burns and telling her never to give up. She remembers naively promising her mentor that she would keep his words in mind. The devastating realization dawns on her. The man she trusted, her mentor, was playing her the entire time. A single furious thought consumes her: revenge. Her eyes burning with hatred, she swears that she will make Professor Charles pay for his betrayal. Seeing the fire of revenge in her eyes, Sehun tells her that while he can't fix her damaged mana circuits, he has another way, and clarifies that he can calibrate her mana usage, which would allow her to use magic despite her injuries. A skeptical Louise demands to know what he wants in return for his seemingly charitable help. He coolly replies that his request is nothing special. His price, he reveals, is her assistance in exploring the 6 great demon realms in the future. Sehun presents her with a choice: trust him and change her fate, or stay put and give up. After a moment of contemplation, she simply smiles. Extending her hand, she agrees to the deal but warns him not to go back on his word. Our guy seals the pact with a handshake, sarcastically retorting, "Look who's talking," which earns him a fiery glare. To begin their training, Sehun presents a bag of tools. Louise is baffled, however, to find the tools are just a bag of cherries, questioning what they could possibly do with them. Just then he begins his lesson, explaining that the pain she feels comes from trying to circulate refined mana through her damaged circuits, and explains that while ambient mana circulates harmlessly, the refined mana needed for magic is what causes her agony. He then poses the crucial question: how can she use mana in her current state without pain? The solution, he explains, is simple but bizarre. She must learn to refine mana directly with her tongue. Confused, she questions how she could do anything with barely any circuits, to which he cryptically answers by comparing it to putting an elephant in a refrigerator. He acknowledges that while this method would be impossible for others, but he knows with certainty that she can do it. Sehun then reveals a shocking truth from his past life. He tells her that before his regression, she earned her title as the Explosive Dogs using this very method. Resigned yet intrigued, Louise agrees to hear him out and asks what she needs to do. He demonstrates the first step of their training by popping a cherry into his mouth. Then, he effortlessly ties the stem into a knot with his tongue, explaining it's the basic forms for training the mana circuits in her mouth. With his mouth full, he instructs her that she has to delicately manipulate the circuits on her tongue to tie the knots. Deeply unimpressed, Louise thinks to herself that this man isn't a genius, but a complete lunatic. The following days are filled with her frustrated outburst against his strange training methods. Her training includes shouting with all her might while infusing her voice with mana and emotion. She is even made to recite 2 difficult tongue twisters at once, much to the bewilderment of her doctor. With chopsticks in her mouth, a furious Louise threatens to kill him if he makes her mess up her pronunciation. After a grueling week, however, she excitedly proclaims that she has successfully completed the bizarre training. Sehun praises her for mastering the tasks in just a week, but she smugly brushes it off as nothing. However, our guy realizes that maybe it's because it's a training method she created herself, but she is adapting fast. She then screams in exasperation, demanding to know what improving her vocalization and pronunciation has to do with mana. Taking a breath, she apologizes, admitting she yelled because it all felt so futile. Unfazed, she calmly suggests they continue, asking what the next knot is. But then, he reveals the true purpose of her exercises. It was all training for incantation magics. The term incantation magic catches Louise completely off guard, her face flushing with surprise. Sehun prepares to demonstrate, telling her to watch closely. He begins his explanation, stating that incantation magic requires 2 fundamental things. The first is a minimal amount of mana to act as a core, and the second is a strong will to manifest it as magic. In other words, a strong mental image is the key. The clearer the image, the stronger the incantation. He focuses and chants, "Sphere," instantly manifesting a small, stable ball of mana. He then explains that the next step is to change the sphere into a form that's easier to fire. Chanting transform and elemental infusion, he reshapes and empowers the mana. He continues to manipulate the spell, focusing on increasing its penetration power and speed. With a final command of accelerate, he unleashes the fully formed spell. The bolt of energy erupts, shattering the hospital window and carving a path outside. The spell flies high into the sky before he calmly commands it to dissipate. Looking at the shattered window, he sheepishly admits he got a bit too focused, so he offers a quick apology and awkwardly promises to pay for the broken window. He then cautiously asks Louise if she's mad about the sudden destruction. But instead of anger, her eyes glow with power as she chants, "Sphere," perfectly recreating the basic incantation she just witnessed. Sehun is genuinely impressed, remarking that to recreate it immediately after seeing it only once is incredible. But before he can finish his praise, Louise, feeling that the spell is lacking, instinctively chants, "Rebuild." A complex array of magical energy explodes from her. A bead of sweat runs down his face as he realizes that magic truly ignores the laws of the world. Meanwhile, Louise looks at her hand in awe, feeling the surge of power for the first time in ages. Our guy now understands that a single word spoken from a powerful mental image is all it takes to defy the very laws of magic, a principle she has just proven. In the hospital, Louise Valent touches her neck in disbelief, realizing the painful backlash from her magic is completely gone. A wave of elation washes over her as she savors the feeling of finally being able to use magic again without suffering. Sehun gently tells her it's okay to cry, but with newfound determination, she clenches her fist, refusing to shed any tears for now. Fueled by a thirst for vengeance, she vows that she won't cry until she has torn out the throat of the one who ruined her life. The masterminds behind her downfall are revealed: Professor Charles, Gotts Kruger, and Pierre Bormut. Seeing her fiery resolve, a satisfied Sehun announces it's time to proceed to the next step. A confused Louise turns to him, questioning what this mysterious next step entails. He then reveals his plan by showing her his phone, where he's registering her for a program designed for overcoming trauma. Meanwhile, at the prestigious Ivory Tower mock training ground, other students are engaged in intense combat practice. A group of freshmen struggles desperately against a powerful skeleton warrior, cursing its overwhelming strength. Indeed, the source of their trouble is a formidable hooded skeleton wreathed in a powerful blue aura, clearly far beyond their level. Watching from a balcony, Gotts Kruger looks on with disgust as a freshman is effortlessly thrown back. He scoffs with contempt, judging this year's entire freshman class as completely worthless. His arrogant musings are cut short by a notification on his phone as he surveys the training grounds below. Annoyed by the interruption and the pathetic display, he angrily dismisses the struggling student and the skeletal opponent. On the phone with his co-conspirator, Gotts impatiently asks what could be so important that it required a call. It's Hans Barmut, who informs him that a challenge has just been posted on the Tower Cafe's online board. Calling the situation annoying, Hans tells him to look at the post, a new challenge from a user named Greyrat. After reading the post, Gotts slams his fist in a rage, yelling, "This crazy bitch." The challenge is from Louise, publicly announcing her recovery and her return to using magic. In the post, she formally requests a duel with Cadet Gotts Kruger to settle the debt from half a year ago. Back in the hospital, Sehun and Louise review the taunting post, which dares Gotts to accept the duel unless he's afraid of getting injured. Enraged by the provocative message, "Die if you're scared," Gotts crushes his phone in his hand. Seething with fury, he mutters, "How dare you mock me?" He internally swears that this time he will beat her so severely that she will never be able to stand again. Meanwhile, back at Ur's General Hospital, Louise begins to panic, asking Sehun if he's actually crazy for issuing the challenge. Our guy remains completely unfazed by her outburst, nonchalantly pointing out that it wasn't a death threat. Louise frantically explains that her incantation magic is still at a beginner's level, and that a duel for revenge makes no sense. Growing suspicious, she accuses him of being a spy, but he calmly tells her to relax, assuring her it's all part of his plan. Sehun explains that incantation magic is instinctive, and that her subconscious fear of magic is what's holding her back, and insists that this duel is absolutely necessary for her to overcome her trauma, and pleads for her trust. Still hesitant, she voices her greatest fear: what will happen if she loses the duel, and worries that another defeat will only deepen her trauma, making her condition even worse. Sehun firmly grabs her shoulder, telling her to stop talking nonsense and have faith. Leaning in close, he confidently declares that there is absolutely no way she could lose to a coward like Gotts. His unwavering confidence forges a new bond between them, and he reveals he's already prepared a special material for her new weapon. The material is a supreme-grade dying waterstone, a rare ore he extracted from his newfound bond with Louise herself. Her determination reignited by his confidence, Louise steels herself and asks what her next phase of training will be. He cryptically replies that her next training is an examination, leaving her completely bewildered. Se-hoon then dramatically pulls on a black glove, preparing for the next stage of her unorthodox training. He reveals, much to her shock, that it's time for an oral examination. Utterly baffled by his bizarre methods, she can only think that her new mentor is a complete lunatic. Thanks to Louise's public challenge, rumors about the true nature of her accident begin to circulate among the students. Students start connecting the dots, speculating that the Barmut and Kruger families conspired to eliminate her since she was the true frontrunner for the scholarship. Meanwhile, Gotz's older brother is on the call, calling his younger sibling a pathetic fool. On the phone, he berates Gotz for being unable to handle one person and creating an even larger mess. A stressed and sweating Gotz can only apologize profusely to his intimidating older brother. His brother warns him not to expect any family intervention, as that would only make things worse, before ordering Gotz to handle the situation himself. Gotz seethes with frustration, knowing his powerful father could instantly resolve the entire issue if he would only step in. However, he laments his predicament, realizing his older brothers are likely celebrating his failure, as it weakens his own position within the UD group. As he stews in his frustration, he is interrupted by the arrival of his co-conspirator. Gotz turns to sarcastically greet his supposed best friend, Pierre Barmut. Enraged, he confronts Pierre, accusing him of broadcasting their shared crime to the entire academy. He then aggressively confronts Pierre, demanding that he stop staying silent and explain himself. He points out that it was Pierre who changed their original plan, perhaps at the behest of Professor Charles. Gotz dismisses any apologies and demands that he provide an immediate solution. Although Pierre admits his own mistake in the matter, he raises the stakes, warning him to fix this mess unless he wants to be kicked out of the line of succession right alongside him. With a cold smile, Pierre tells the worried Gotz not to fret, and confidently declares that he has a surefire way to deal with their problem for good, hinting at a dark and permanent solution. The scene transitions to the hospital, where Se-hoon examines the dying waterstone, noting how different it is from the aggressive bondstone he'd expected from the explosive dog he once knew. He realizes that she has changed. Instead of forcing materials to suit her, she is now adapting to them, making her a far more cooperative partner. However, he contemplates if this was her original nature, concluding that with such a superior material, he can forge an even better armament than he had planned. Just as he is strategizing, Louise arrives in his room, mentioning she heard he finally got his cast off. Her eyes fall upon the glowing stone, and she asks if it's the special material. He confirms that it's time to begin crafting her weapon. He then instructs her on her role to simply infuse the stone with mana until it stops changing color, explaining that no complex refining will be necessary. Se-hoon reflects that while he focused on correction in his past life, the ideal conditions and materials he has now will allow him to draw out their maximum power. With these perfect conditions and a cooperative partner, he prepares to forge an armament that will unleash the stone's full potential. Just then he begins the process, infusing mana into a projection alloy and expertly spreading it into a thin, perfectly flat square. As he simultaneously distributes and engraves complex mana circuits, Louise watches in awe, amazed at his ability to perceive such intricate patterns. After a long and focused session, he finally finishes his part, and a pleased Louise presents the fully infused and now brilliantly glowing stone. He instructs her to carefully place the completed dying water stone onto the prepared alloy sheet. As the stone makes contact, it initiates a series of automatic processes, beginning with mana amplification and formula correction. Then, a cascade of powerful enchantments, including mana gathering, trajectory guidance, and pain relief, are automatically embedded into the armament. He explains that the stone reflects the 73 different incantations he's imbued, which will make up for the short duration of each individual spell. Louise marvels at the beautiful, chaotic display of mana as the iron plates begin to assemble themselves according to the engraved circuits. The plates twist and fuse together in a flash of light, completing the armament's formation with a final surge of power. The newly forged rare-grade armament, Vargur, hovers before Louise. She asks in disbelief if this incredible creation is truly hers. Eager to test her new power, she asks to try it, but he warns her to use the weakest magic possible since she can't fully control it yet. As they exit the room, her rehabilitation doctor walks by, completely unaware of the powerful artifact that was just created. Suddenly, an immense explosion rips through the hospital hallway, originating from her room. The doctor rushes back to find the room completely destroyed, with Se-hoon and a stunned Louise standing amidst the wreckage. A flustered Louise tries to apologize, admitting she didn't mean for the blast to be so powerful, while Se-hoon casually remarks that he told her to be gentle. Her sheepish apology hangs in the air, a stark contrast to the immense destruction she just accidentally caused. 1 week later at the martial arts hall, students buzz with anticipation, doubting whether the injured Louise Valent will even show up for her duel. They gossip about her condition, believing she's still too injured to use magic properly and dismissing the duel as a bust. Se-hoon recalls watching her prepare from a distance, sensing her nervousness despite her tough exterior and deciding to offer some encouragement. As he walks through the hall, he's stopped in his tracks by a strange, distorted sound that only he seems to hear. The sound grows clearer, and he recognizes its resonance as dangerously similar to mana erosion. Realizing this is an ambush, he immediately deduces that the true target must be Louise. Pinpointing the source, he sprints towards a warehouse near her waiting room. Without a moment's hesitation, he kicks down the locked warehouse door. Inside, he discovers the source of the mental attack, a dreaming speaker device placed atop a box. As he approaches, the speaker begins to project a hallucination, taunting him about the pipe dream he has been chasing. He is shocked as he recognizes the all-too-familiar voice emanating from the illusion. An apparition of his master from his past life materializes before him, causing him to momentarily question if she is real. The illusion of his master coldly mocks him, asking how long he plans to keep up his childish prank of regression. She scoffs at the idea that he turned back time with a mere trash dagger and declares that his hope is baseless. With a condescending smirk, the apparition calls him as stubborn as ever and demands that he listen to her. The hallucination lectures him, comparing his dream to a poisoned chalice that is sweet at first but ultimately meaningless. The illusion of his master looms over him, commanding him to accept the reality that he has already failed. She demands that he stop his ugly struggling and simply accept his death. However, Se-hoon calmly faces the apparition, stating that he has one correction to make. Just then, he raises his hand, declaring that his real master wouldn't be so long-winded when telling someone to go die, and follows up with a powerful strike of his hammer, shattering the ghostly figure. The illusion breaks apart like glass, revealing the magical device that was generating it. The dreaming speaker sparks and crackles as its magic is violently dispelled. With the illusion gone, he retrieves his hammer, furious that his enemies would dare to create such a crude and disrespectful impersonation of his master. After a brief mental struggle, Se-hoon shatters the dreaming speaker, the device used to ambush Louise with its awakening dream skill. While puzzled by the unfamiliar skill, he dismisses it for now, as his priority is the immediate threat to Louise. But just as he tries to pick up the device, he is taken aback. The device exploded in a fiery explosion. Now, on the warehouse floor lie the shattered remains of the magical device. As he examines the wreckage, Se-hoon recognizes the lingering magical traces and identifies them as belonging to a notorious group. He identifies the culprits as Dawn, a fanatical and extremely radical group of mages known for their dangerous ideology, and grimly recalls that Dawn is the same group that once controlled Louise in his previous life. With only 10 minutes left until the duel, he worries that Dawn is targeting her once again in this new timeline. He can feel the remnants of mana erosion in his own body reacting to the spell, a testament to its power. Realizing its potency, he grows deeply concerned about what the spell's full effects could be doing to Louise. Meanwhile, in her waiting room, a nervous Louise is agitated by a strange ringing and wonders if the speaker is broken. Annoyed, she admits the sound is getting on her nerves, exacerbating her pre-duel anxiety. Her confidence wavers as she touches the scar on her neck, worrying that her appearance will make others doubt her recovery. Trying to rally her spirits, she clutches the bandages, telling herself, "It's fine, I can do this." And so, she rips off the bandage, defiantly calling the scar pathetic as she attempts to steel herself for the fight. But suddenly, the illusion magic takes hold, making her scar feel like a grotesque, vine-like growth choking her. Overwhelmed by the horrific sensation, she collapses in despair, questioning if she has truly changed at all. The psychological attack intensifies, showing her a horrifying vision of failure and bloody injury that shatters her composure. As she falls deeper into despair, the illusion projects an image of Se-hoon looking down on her. The silent, judging stare of the illusory Se-hoon pierces her psyche and amplifies her self-doubt. Overwhelmed by the fear of disappointing the one person who believes in her, her resolve completely crumbles. Just as she's about to break, the illusion is forcefully shattered by a voice yelling, "Snap out of it!" The real Se-hoon bursts into the room, his timely arrival breaking the mental prison she was trapped in. Startled and disoriented, Louise looks up to see him, questioning his sudden appearance. He catches his breath, relieved after a quick search of the room reveals no other traps. Kneeling before the shaken Louise, he asks if she also heard the strange ringing sound. After she confirms it, he reveals it was a trap set by their enemies, which he already destroyed on his way. He then explains that the device triggered her trauma by stimulating the mana erosion in her body, a trick that almost fooled him as well. Louise finally understands, realizing with a sigh that the sudden crippling panic was a calculated assault by their enemy. Ashamed, she calls herself pathetic for falling for their tricks after boasting so confidently just hours before. In a brutal display of reverse psychology, Sehun bluntly agrees, calling her pathetic for talking big only to mope around now. He taunts her, saying she might as well run away since everyone already knows she lost once before. He continues to provoke her, asking who cares if people curse her for fleeing. Then, he cruelly suggests that she can just use her trauma as a convenient excuse to give up. Louise sees as he mocks her vanished determination, asking if she's scared of being crushed in front of everyone again. His taunts finally hit their mark, and an enraged Louise screams at the crazy bastard to shut up. She lunges forward and grabs him by the collar, demanding to know what gives him the right to run his mouth, and furiously unleashes her pent-up anger, demanding to know who he thinks he is to treat her trauma so lightly. Her hand tightens on his shirt as her raw frustration finally boils over. She tearfully screams about her struggles, asking what she's supposed to do when trying her best isn't enough. Having successfully ignited her fighting spirit, Sehun silently endures it as she calls him an arrogant son of a bitch. With her fire reignited, she furiously declares that if she loses this duel, he will take all the responsibility. A faint, bloody smile appears on Sehun's face as he calmly agrees, his plan having worked perfectly. Stunned into silence by his immediate agreement, she can only manage a confused, "What?" He then tells her that there's no way she can lose to someone like Gotts, and declares with conviction that he doesn't fight losing battles, not anymore. With her resolve restored, Sehun gives her two final, simple instructions for the duel. He tells her to trust him completely and to unleash her full power to bite her opponent to shreds. At the dueling grounds, Gotts Kruger greets Louise condescendingly as she strides confidently into the arena. He smirks, mockingly asking if she is just trying to protect her pride, having heard that her use of magic was now impossible. The crowd murmurs in awe at his hero-grade armament and expensive army of skeleton summons. Yet as the announcer declares the match will begin shortly, Louise coolly dismisses the display as unimpressive. Robed and ready, she reflects that both her old scar and her pathetic opponent are now beneath her. As the countdown begins, she unleashes her power, declaring that she has waited 6 long months for this moment. An incredible surge of blue mana erupts from her, leaving Gotts to wonder about her mysterious armament. He can't even comprehend what's happening, demanding to know how she is even using mana. With her eyes glowing, Louise dons a mask and addresses her armament, Vargr, asking it for a favor. As she begins her incantation, she asks her new weapon to simply hold out for as long as it possibly can. Amplifying his power with the hero-grade armament, the Staff of the Fallen King, Gotts Kruger commands his shadowy minions to kill Louise. And so, a horde of skeletal soldiers, reanimated by his magic, swarms towards her, ready to tear her apart. Yet, unfazed by the oncoming undead army, Louise dons her mask and begins to chant, setting her own plan in motion. His skeletal minions, fueled by necrotic energy, are struck by her magic, completely unable to move because of the blue circles on their necks. After that, she unleashes her first incantation, a powerful spell named Deathbite. Channeling the spell, she shatters the charging skeletons with a single, magically enhanced punch. The Deathbite incantation proves devastatingly effective, allowing her to effortlessly dismantle his skeletal army. Gotts can only stare in disbelief, muttering that her sudden surge in power makes no sense. Refusing to accept defeat, he attempts to restore his fallen minions with a new infusion of mana, but as he tries to channel his magic, he's shocked to find a mysterious blue sigil has been placed around his neck. The sigil activates, coursing with energy that backfires through his body and causing him to cry out in agony as his own magic turns against him. The backlash is so intense that it completely ruins his mana circuits, a devastating injury confirmed by the arena's safety mechanisms. Realizing the information he received about her was wrong, a defeated Gotts can only curse his co-conspirator Pierre for the failure. Having incapacitated his minions, Louise descends upon the helpless man to finish the duel. She eyes the hero-grade Staff of the Fallen King, noting its sturdy construction before preparing her final attack. Just as he attempts to surrender, she begins chanting her next spell, cutting him off. In a last-ditch effort, Gotts tries to protect himself by erecting a powerful barrier. With glowing eyes and a hand outstretched, Louise prepares to unleash her final, decisive blow. She then utters the name of her ultimate attack for this duel, Revenge Bite. The once mighty Staff of the Fallen King is left broken and powerless after the impact of her spell. With his weapon shattered and his body broken, Gotts Kruger lies defeated on the arena floor. The announcer's voice echoes through the silent arena, officially declaring Louise Vallant the winner of the duel. The aftermath leaves a field of defeated skeletons and a stunned crowd bearing witness to her overwhelming victory. Her eyes narrow with cold determination, a clear warning to all who might cross her. She internally declares that anyone who messes with her from now on had better be ready for the consequences. Sometime later, at the Babel Academy hospital, Gotts Kruger lies unconscious. A diagnostic report reveals that 38 of his mana circuits are permanently damaged, rendering magic use impossible. Professor Charles notes that serious complaints are coming from both the UD Group and Dawn, the organizations that were backing Gotts, and he laments that while Gotts was an idiot, his aptitude still made him a useful pawn. Pierre Barma offers a curt apology to him for the plan's failure. The professor, unimpressed, asks his young co-conspirator if he has a solution now that things have gone south. Pierre reveals his next move. He plans to deal with Louise once she enters the exclusive Ivory Tower. As for Lee Se-hoon, he proposes they use the upcoming subjugation practice to ambush him, asking the professor for help. Professor Charles agrees to provide support, so long as the plan doesn't cause any direct issues for him. However, the professor gives Pierre a chilling warning. If he fails again, he'd better be ready to give up his succession rights. Pierre sullenly agrees to the terms. With their new plan in place, Pierre leaves the hospital room, leaving Gotts to his thoughts. As he leaves, he quietly mumbles Se-hoon's name, marking him as a primary target. Just then, a system window appears, explaining Se-hoon's newly acquired skill, Awakening Dream, a form of self-hypnosis that forcibly awakens a clouded mind. However, he finds the new skill unsettling, as acquiring a skill requires at least a minimum level of aptitude which he shouldn't have. He comes to a shocking conclusion. If he developed a talent he didn't previously have, then his regression might not be a simple second chance. His mind flashes back to the moment of his death in his past life, where the Awakening Dream skill first activated. With a sudden jolt, his eyes snap open as everything clicks into place. He realizes his regression is actually a mental barrier skill, a form of self-preservation he subconsciously activated at the moment of his death. Later, Louise finds Se-hoon in the hospital lounge. He is contemplating how to use his new skill with the dream ivory he possesses. Finding him sitting alone, she coolly asks him what he's doing. Se-hoon calmly replies that he's just meditating, a response that leaves her slightly perplexed. She then mentions that she has tests scheduled all week. At this, our guy praises Dr. Ahn Jong-won. With a slight smile, she agrees that the doctor helped her a lot over the past half year. Changing the subject, she reveals to Se-hoon that she met with their shared enemy, Professor Charles, the day before. In a flashback, the professor patronizingly congratulates her on her recovery and asks if she'll return to the elemental department. He then offers to help her get a special scholarship for the Ivory Tower as a gift, but she flatly rejects it. Louise formally thanks him for the offer, but informs him that she plans to transfer to the martial arts department instead. Professor Charles is left speechless as she explains that her new magic is different from the theories taught in his department. And the professor replies, "You are welcome to come and find me anytime if you change your mind." Back in the present, she confesses that it took all her willpower just to hold back the urge to kill that bastard right on the spot, her eyes burning with vengeful fury. Se-hoon calmly reassures her, saying that she has suffered enough by holding back her rage. His mind then flashes back to the Watchers, a fanatical group that sought to control the 6 great demon gods. He recalls that this group was the predecessor to the apocalyptic force known as Pandemonium. He also remembers that Dawn, a magic-worshipping sect within the Watchers, was responsible for manipulating Louise in his previous life. Suspecting Dawn's involvement, Se-hoon listens as Louise admits that when she first arrived at the hospital, she felt utterly hopeless. Lying in her hospital bed, she had despaired, thinking she would soon be expelled and could never get her revenge. She had questioned whether an insignificant non-hero like herself could ever stand against such powerful enemies. Terrified of her bleak future, she had resigned herself to simply hiding away in the hospital. Looking back, Louise now considers her past despair to have been foolish. She then looks up at Se-hoon and sincerely thanks him, saying he has given her a new reason to live. She muses that perhaps all her past hardships were necessary just so she could learn incantation magic, or perhaps they were a trial she had to overcome to defeat Gotts Kruger. Ultimately, she wonders if fate orchestrated everything just so she could meet him in this very room. Visibly flustered by her own heartfelt confession, she struggles to find the right words. She finally manages a simple but profound message: "Thanks for helping me." Her genuine gratitude strengthens their connection, raising their bond level to 2 and defining their relationship as one of guidance. Se-hoon is caught completely off guard, musing that he never thought the infamous explosive dogs was capable of such sincerity. Embarrassed, Louise quickly gets up to leave, but he stops her, demanding she hand over her broken armament, Vargar. He explains that the armament broke due to the overload and that he can simply incorporate it into the new one he makes for her. But she coolly replies, "Why should I return it?" With a triumphant grin, she claims Vargar as her own and bolts from the room, leaving him to deal with the aftermath. Just as she leaves, Jake Myers excitedly bursts into the room, having finally found him. he proudly announces that he has gathered all the materials Se-hoon requested and asks if he's ready to forge the new sword. Faced with a mountain of homework from his 2-week absence, Se-hoon glances at the pile but calmly agrees, stating that he has time before his next class. Though he feels burdened by the workload, Jake brushes off the concern, confidently claiming that he can finish 2 weeks' worth of assignments in a single day. He then casually leads him into his private workshop. Our guy looks around, surprised, and asks, "Did you clean the room because I was coming?" Jake replies, "This is pretty ordinary." Jake directs his attention to a shelf where he has already laid out the rare materials for the new weapon. The star of the collection is a top-tier, rare water golem decor, a potent and fully charged power source. After a brief inspection of the core floating in a bowl, Se-hoon gives a nod of approval. Jake questions how he'll make a sword from the liquid, but Se-hoon explains that the core must first mature. He then announces that he will use his white light styles to begin the delicate process. Dipping his finger into the liquid core, he initiates a complex refining technique. With masterful mana control, he manipulates the core's liquid, making it thinner and more refined. As he pushes the material to be more precise, Jake watches in astonishment while the core begins to glow with immense power. Satisfied with the core's overloaded state, Se-hoon declares the initial preparation complete. A panicked Jake realizes he is intentionally overloading the core, but Se-hoon confirms that a standard 100 output isn't enough for his plans. When Jake suggests using a stronger core, Se-hoon cryptically tells him to just watch, hinting at a risky but necessary process. Telling Jake to watch closely, Se-hoon begins the next phase, property assimilation. He applies multiple complex enchantments to the core, including perception enhancement and core synchronization. Then, he turns to Jake and instructs him to present his right hand. After making a small cut on Jake's finger, he lets a single drop of his blood fall toward the energized core. The blood fuses with the core, causing a brilliant explosion of red and blue energy. Jake is suddenly struck by an inexplicable sensation, a feeling he's never experienced before. He feels an eerie, deep connection to the core, as if he were looking at a part of his own body. Se-hoon instructs him to add a few drops of his own blood to the liquid every day for a week, until the core no longer absorbs it. Completely bewildered by this bizarre ritual, Jake asks for an explanation. Se-hoon explains that it's a trick to deal with Jake's unique ability, which stems from an uncontrollable mana compression phenomenon. So, instead of trying to control it, they're exploiting a flaw in the skill by feeding the core Jake's blood, tricking his ability into recognizing the future weapon as part of his body. Jake has a moment of realization as the explanation clarifies the strange sensation he just felt. With the lesson over, Se-hoon asks if he has any more questions. Jake concedes that the method is so new and complex that he probably wouldn't understand it any better, even with more explanation. Despite his skepticism about the unheard-of technique, he smiles, admitting that because it's Se-hoon, he's genuinely looking forward to the results. With the sword's preparation underway, he announces he's heading off to class. Se-hoon arrives at the main hall of the Babel Refining Department for his next lecture. As he approaches the classroom for the esoteric origin of armaments, he expects the class to be as peculiar as its subject matter. However, he's shocked to find a nearly empty room filled with utterly despondent students who seem to have lost all hope. A familiar voice then welcomes the surprised Se-hoon to the strange class. It's Professor Kim In-keol, who greets his star pupil and asks if he has fully recovered from his injuries. Lee Se-hoon arrives at his Origin of Armaments class, only to be surprised by the arrival of Professor Kim In-keol. Showing genuine concern, the professor asks if Se-hoon has recovered from the arm injury he sustained. Se-hoon reassures him that it was a minor injury and that he has already made a complete recovery. The professor then gestures to the despondent students in the nearly empty classroom, acknowledging that this is Se-hoon's first time attending. Putting him on the spot, he hands him a sword and challenges him to discern the blacksmith's intention. Se-hoon immediately identifies the weapon's primary function, noting that it is specialized for thrusting attacks. He continues his flawless analysis, deducing from the sword's center of gravity that it was custom-made for someone with a limp in their right leg. Impressed by the detailed observation, Professor Kim pushes him to see if he can perceive anything else. Se-hoon takes a moment to concentrate, feeling for the deeper intent embedded within the blade's very being. Looking beyond its physical form, he senses the blacksmith's profound wish that the sword would never be used to kill. When asked for his reasoning, he explains his deduction, pointing out that the blade is intentionally quite dull. He adds that despite the dullness, the sword's balance is excellent, a clear sign the creator didn't want the wielder to die from the weapon breaking in combat. Professor Kim confirms Se-hoon's perfect analysis, explaining how a blacksmith's intent can fundamentally change a weapon's purpose. He then poses a philosophical question: is a sword's true origin, its inherent killing intent, or the will of its creator. The core conflict of the weapon is visualized, questioning whether its nature is defined by violence or the blacksmith's vow against killing, and reveals that this very question is the central theme of armament fundamental studies. Sehun mentally files this new perspective away, acknowledging it as a useful consideration for his own craft. Just as the lesson seems to be starting, the professor stuns him by announcing that he has already finished the classes for the entire semester. With a hearty laugh, Professor Kim declares that Sehun's masterful analysis has earned him a perfect score on the spot. As the other dejected students leave, Sehun realizes his impromptu exam just eliminated all competition for the professor's research budget. Just as he turns to leave, the professor stops him, pleased that things have worked out better than expected. Intrigued by Sehun's performance, Professor Kim asks if he has any other classes to attend. Sehun smirks, replying that, since he just passed the semester in one go, he expects to be quite bored from now on. Just then, the two leave the main campus and head toward the Babel Outer District. Professor Kim takes him on a high-speed ride through the city streets on his personal motorcycle. The futuristic bike, glowing with energy, easily navigates the roads as the professor pushes it to high speeds. After the ride, a wide-eyed Sehun expresses his amazement, unable to believe the incredible speed was only 30% of the bike's output. Professor Kim beams with pride, boasting that the motorcycle is his second most prized possession. With a cryptic smile, he tells Sehun that he'll be showing him his most prized possession very soon. The professor leads him to his private, secluded workshop. It's a well-equipped but humble space, filled with various tools of the blacksmithing trade. While Sehun admires the professor's top-of-the-line equipment, he's told to put on a suit of salamander protective gear. Sehun skeptically questions if such heavy-duty protective gear is truly necessary for whatever the professor is planning. But the professor insists, warning him to keep his distance while donning a pair of heat-resistant gloves. With a dramatic flair, he opens a massive, sealed furnace, unleashing an immense wave of light and heat. Shielding his eyes, Sehun is left speechless by the object revealed within the overwhelming heat of the forge. He immediately recognizes the hero-grade armament as the Broken Flame, a legendary blade whose origin was destroyed, rendering it useless. The sword's status indicates it is dangerously close to its heat limit, threatening permanent destruction if not handled properly. The professor reveals this sword is his life's work, a project he's been trying to repair by slowly raising its stored heat since before he even came to Babel, and recounts how he fruitlessly poured all his money into the sword after failing to repair its origin, turning it into a massive financial burden. Desperate and on the verge of giving up, he was unexpectedly approached by Academy head Ludwig. Ludwig offered to cover the sword's exorbitant maintenance costs, but only on the condition that Kim and Kyo become a professor at Babel. Sehun correctly pieces it all together, realizing the professor's research and this grand reveal are his way of asking for help. Professor Kim confesses that he's hit an insurmountable wall in his attempts to repair the legendary sword. He looks at Sehun with newfound respect, ready to make his plea. He declares that out of all the blacksmiths he has ever met, Sehun possesses the most outstanding talent. Understanding the weight of the request, Sehun solemnly agrees to take on the challenge. He calls it a rare opportunity to research such an armament, but cuts off the professor's thanks with a single word. However, with a greedy glint in his eye, he negotiates his price, stating he'll need a hefty research budget to properly work on the sword. The professor lets out a weary but relieved sigh, a small price to pay for a glimmer of hope, and says to him, "Just don't make it obvious to the other cadets." As Sehun leaves, he contemplates the Broken Flame, knowing that if repaired, it would become a legendary-grade weapon. He recalls the legendary 5-element armaments, 5 of the most powerful weapons in existence. These legendary arms were known for their peerless mastery over their respective mana attributes. Sehun confirms his suspicion. The Broken Flame is the original, damaged form of the legendary Wacheon Greatsword. He then grimly remembers that in his past life, the sword's last owner was the Puppeteer, one of the infamous 10 Evils. Sehun feels the pressure of this knowledge, worrying about the implications of repairing such a dangerous weapon, when his phone buzzes with a notification. It's a message from Dean Ryu Yunha, reminding him about their subjugation practice and asking if he has time this weekend. Deciding to seize the opportunity, Sehun fires back a decisive and immediate reply, "Let's go right now." True to his word, Sehun meets the dean at the Subspace Terminal, a hub for traveling to dangerous zones. Other students whisper in shock as they spot Dean Ryu Yunha waiting for someone at the terminal. She greets him coolly as he arrives, ready for their excursion. When she asks about his injuries, Sehun confidently pats his shoulder, confirming he's fully healed and ready for action. The surrounding students are stunned into silence as they realize the dean was waiting for none other than the controversial freshman, Lee Sehun. The system announces their joint entry into a D-class danger zone, a spectacle for all the other students to witness. The onlookers gossip furiously, connecting the dots between the rumors that Sehun is sponsored by the dean, favored by Professor Kim, and even noticed by the academy head. They're left to wonder if Lee Se-hoon is truly as big of a deal as his powerful connections suggest. One thing becomes certain to the entire student body: with Lee Se-hoon at the center of it, a new wind of change is about to blow through Babel Academy. Se-hoon's subjugation practice begins as he and Dean Ryu Unha arrive at the gate to the notorious Unwo Mountain. As they stand before the shimmering portal, she confirms that this is indeed the entrance to their destination. Before they head inside, he listens as the dean prepares to give him some final instructions. She announces that her first order of business is to inspect his combat equipment. He shows off his standard-issue combat uniform, which the dean finds adequate but unimpressive. Declaring she has something better, she presents a mysterious, compact black cube. She tells him to excuse her as she activates the item, which immediately begins to transform in her hand. The cube instantly expands into hero-grade armor made of shadow matter, equipping itself onto a stunned Se-hoon. Beaming with satisfaction, the dean explains that it's a gift she had no use for, but it suits him perfectly. He graciously thanks her, while dryly noting to himself that if she had truly liked the gift, she would have saved it to eat later. With the gear check complete, she tells him to follow her as they finally step into the danger zone. Just inside the portal, she explains that the barrier is a manatech device that blocks demonic energy but is completely harmless to humans. However, the moment he steps past the protective field, he is violently assaulted by the potent demonic energy permeating Unwo Mountain. The dean calmly watches his reaction, warning him that he might have an adverse reaction to the hostile atmosphere. He immediately drops to one knee in pain, prompting a concerned dean to ask if he's alright and advise him to calm his body. Struggling to adapt, he grits his teeth, the intense pain driving home the reality that he is in a new, unconditioned body. Yet, he quickly recovers and stands, declaring he's fine and impressing the dean with his excellent recovery speed. She then begins her briefing, explaining that all the monsters inhabiting Unwo Mountain are nocturnal. She warns that the wolves possess a developed sense of smell and the intelligence to launch coordinated attacks, before asking for a strategy. With unwavering confidence, he declares that since he has a reliable guardian, he'll simply punch through the front lines. The dean, however, clarifies her role, stating that, as this is his practice session, she will not intervene as a general rule. She assures him the armor will protect him from serious injury, but she will halt the subjugation if things get too dangerous, a condition he readily accepts. And so, standing as bait in a clearing, Se-hoon waits as the menacing sounds of a wolf pack surround him from the darkness. Suddenly, a massive pack of ravenous silver wolves burst from the woods, charging straight for him. Observing from a safe distance, even the experienced dean is taken aback, noting that the number of wolves is far higher than expected. Facing the oncoming horde, he calmly rests a hand on his hilt, telling himself to wait. He remains perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the charging pack, waiting for the precise moment to strike. His strategy is simple: wait until every single silver wolf has entered his attack range. As the wolves close in, he finally unleashes a furious, fiery arc with his blade, devastating the front line of the pack. The dean watches in silence as he stands completely unfazed amidst the bodies of the wolves he just cut down. While she is stunned into silence by his brutal efficiency, he seems merely annoyed by the encounter. Just then, the dean's stomach growls audibly as she admits to herself that watching his powerful display has made her hungry. Meanwhile, Se-hoon continues his relentless assault, his five-color fireblade glowing with immense power. He masterfully unleashes the unique properties of his sword, sending vibrant, multicolored arcs of flame tearing through the wolf pack. Demonstrating his combat versatility, he fluidly shifts to a reverse grip, as a silver wolf howls and lunges at him. With perfect form, he lands a clean, fatal strike against the wolf. His eyes glowing with intense focus. Taking a brief pause, he analyzes his performance, realizing he needs to conserve stamina by making his attacks more efficient. From a distance, Dean Ryu Unha keenly observes his fighting style, realizing he is leveraging his blacksmithing knowledge to perfectly enhance each slash with his blade's 5 fire properties. His technique is impressive, but she is utterly amazed by his flawless, intrinsic understanding of the weapon he wields. Awed by the spectacle, she finally understands the terrifying combat potential of a master blacksmith. As she watches him fight, she can't help but chew on her tie, complaining that no matter how much she eats, her hunger won't go away. After a flurry of slashes, Se-hoon stands over the carnage, having dispatched an incredible 94 monsters in just 20 minutes. Breathing steadily, he decides to conserve his energy, reminding himself that his true goal is to find Gottfried Kruger's hidden item. But when he turns to address the dean, he finds her staring at his blood-splattered sword with a ravenous hunger in her eyes. Before he can react, she lunges forward with her tongue out, attempting to lick the monster blood and gore off his sword. He yanks his sword away just in time, leaving a shocked and disappointed Dean with her bizarre craving unfulfilled. Regaining her composure, she pretends she was listening the whole time, but he knows she was completely lost in her strange appetite. Just as he declares they'll take a break, a chilling wind howls through the desolate, thorny landscape. Their break is cut short by a terrifying growl as the pack's massive alpha wolf, the true boss of the mountain, emerges from the shadows. After decimating the Silver Wolf Pack, Sehun and Dean Ryu Unha take a short break. Sehun laments that if only he has more accustomed to his new armor, he could have fought even more efficiently. He sighs, admitting his current weak body is the real limiting factor, but just then, the Dean gets his attention. Intrigued, she asks him where he learned his fighting style, noting that his movements show years of experience. She presses the question, wanting to know who could have taught him a style so purely focused on efficiency. Our guy replies that he learned it himself out of necessity, which prompts a concerned look from the Dean as she asks just what kind of life he lived. Sehun's mind drifts to his past as he clutches the sword that represents his life as a blacksmith. He flashes back to his younger self, a boy obsessed only with avenging his parents, and he bluntly states the core of his problem back then: he had no money. He then explains to her that every penny he had, from his inheritance to support funds, went into materials for his blacksmithing practice. Realizing he couldn't afford both proper food and materials, he knew he had to change his way of thinking. And so, he adopted a minimalist survival philosophy. As long as his body was functional, it was enough. The Dean listens intently as he explains his grim mindset of simply keeping his body functioning. He continues, recalling the delicate balance of survival, where starving would lower his stamina, but eating cost money he needed for materials. With a wry smile, he admits that the balancing act was so difficult, he almost died of exhaustion during his first winter. She is left speechless, shocked by the brutal reality of his past. Realizing he may have shared too much, Sehun quickly tries to lighten the mood with a story about a nutritious but awful-tasting monster called a horn pig. He reminisces about forcing himself to eat the creature just to save a little money. And he also recounts a time when a pair of cheap, second-hand tongs broke, causing him to spill molten metal on his foot, a painful lesson that taught him never to be stingy with his equipment. But just then, she interrupts his story by saying, "That's enough." Hearing his story, she finally understands the pragmatism and raw efficiency behind his every move. However, she notes that he isn't living that way anymore, and he agrees, adding that such a lifestyle gets you nowhere. He explains his current approach is to push himself just to the limit, but not so far as to damage his mana circuits. As their bond deepens, she places a hand on his shoulder, catching him off guard. Then, in a surprising show of compassion, she tells him that she isn't even pushing herself that hard. And she offers to help him whenever things get difficult, a gesture that completely subverts his expectations of her. He agrees, completely bewildered by the Dean's newfound friendliness and protective attitude. The Dean then begins to lecture him about the opportunities that will come to the cadets, especially to him as the valedictorian. While she is nagging him, he cheekily mutters her earlier comment back at her, that he is not even pushing himself that hard, further strengthening their bond. Suddenly, his senses flare, detecting a strange energy signature in the area. A pulse of demonic energy ripples through the forest under the full moon. Leaping to his feet, he urgently interrupts the Dean, asking her to carry him as high as she can. She is taken aback by this sudden and bizarre request. With no time to explain, he just yells that it's urgent, and she complies, launching them both into the night sky. From their high vantage point, he confirms his suspicion. He's found the hidden dungeon containing Jürgen Kruger's artifact, which is absorbing the moonlight-imbued demonic energy, and recalls that before his regression, it took him a full 3 weeks to locate this dungeon. But now, armed with foreknowledge of the item's properties, he can pinpoint its location in an instant. Sehun decisively points towards a specific spot in the forest, declaring, "It's over there." Confused, she asks what he's pointing at, but he just urges her to hurry before the portal disappears. With Sehun still in her arms, she tells him they'll discuss the details later as she dives towards the target. She plunges towards the ground like a meteor, and smashes into the earth with immense force, shattering the ground and revealing a hidden cavern below. They crash through the rock, and into the darkness, landing in a subterranean space. Their impact creates a massive crater, marking their forceful entry into the hidden dungeon. After landing, a bewildered Dean asks where they are. Sehun calmly explains that they've entered a dungeon artificially created by beast-type monsters. She then assesses the situation, deducing that since the dungeon is undiscovered, it could house B-class or even higher-ranked monsters. Just as she suggests they return to the academy and report their findings, He grimly informs her that leaving might be difficult now, as a new presence makes itself known. From the shadows, a menacing, B-class undead monster with glowing red eyes emerges. He coolly remarks that it would have been a disaster if she hadn't been here, and tells her to hold on tight. Recognizing the threat, the dean agrees that it's time for her to show her true power for the first time in a while. With her eyes glowing and her power flaring, she tells him to hold on tight as she prepares for a serious battle.
Hey everyone! If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out and lets me bring you more great content. Now let's begin the story.